Welcome, everyone. Please welcome to the stage the president of the NYHealth Foundation, David Sandman.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. As the voice of Greg says, I'm David Sandman, President and CEO of the NYHealth Foundation. I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you, whether you're joining us here in person or virtually. We've got quite a far-flung virtual crowd, people from across New York State, from across the country. We think even some people from outside of the US. But it's so nice to be back in person. We haven't done a large conference like this since the onset of COVID, and it's just something you can't substitute, fully virtually. Hope you enjoyed your breakfast. There were some, unhealthy sugary carbs out there, but a lot of healthy options too. So that's for you. For those of you who might not be so familiar with the NYHealth Foundation, we're a private, independent, and statewide foundation with a mission to improve the health of all New Yorkers, most especially people of color and others who have been historically marginalized. And in addition to our work on food and health, we work to advance primary care, to meet the health needs of New York's veterans, and we maintain a pool of flexible funding through our Special Projects Fund. So to learn more about us, I hope you'll visit our website, NYHealthFoundation.org. Definitely join the mailing list. But if you really want to keep up with us on the regular, follow us on LinkedIn, follow the foundation, and follow me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, it's not X. And we'll follow you back. And that way you'll always be in the know as to what is going on at the foundation. So today, of course, is all about healthy food. And I can't really overstate the big role that food plays in our lives. It's, of course, a basic human need. It's a source of nourishment, but it's so much more than that too. Food is culture, food is history, food is at the heart of many family and community traditions. When I ask people about family traditions and so on, it almost always revolves around, or at least includes, food. And food is love. Food is how we express love. Food is how we receive love. And food can be medicine and can promote health and well-being. But it could also contribute to sickness. Too much food, too little food, food that is not nutritious, food that is not culturally appropriate, could all have health consequences. And sadly, far too many New Yorkers are food insecure. A new report from Hunger Free America found that 2.2 million people in New York State lived in food insecure households between 2020 and last year. That's higher than pre-pandemic levels. We have not recovered on that measure. And food insecurity never was and still is not experienced evenly. Its burdens are borne most heavily by people of color, especially Hispanic and Black people. And the foundation's our own analyses of census data show us that in 2022, nearly 1 in 10 New Yorkers reported food insufficiency, which is up from 1 in 12 the prior year. So when you go home today and you're on the subway or you're on the bus, look around. Do the math for yourselves. 1 in 10 of those people may not have enough food to go home to tonight. In households with kids, food insufficiency increased twice as much as in households without children. And last year, nearly 1 in 5 Black and Hispanic New Yorkers experienced food insufficiency, a rate that is twice as high as the rate for white New Yorkers. So this is a very knowledgeable, sophisticated crowd. That data doesn't really surprise you. And those traditional data sources, they help us with the counting part. They tell us how many people are food insecure. But we know less about how does food insecurity play out in people's day-to-day lives? What is the impact on their health? What are the trade-offs and the sacrifices that people make? And how are the programs and the support systems that are supposed to help? Are they working? Are they helping? How can they be improved? So the only way to answer a question like that is to listen directly to the people who experience and endure food insecurity. And that's exactly what we did at the foundation. We commissioned a first of its kind survey to take a deep dive into the lived experiences of hungry New Yorkers. We surveyed more than 1,500 New Yorkers across the state, and the results, could not be more clear. Food insecurity is so strongly associated with worse health. You can find the full results on our website. I really encourage you, to download it. There's tons of data. There's tons of charts and graphs. It's all shareable. You can put it on social, all of that. But I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights. Food insecure New Yorkers were twice as likely to report unsatisfactory health as those who are food insecure. More than 20% of food insecure New Yorkers told us that they delay or skip medical care. Food insecure New Yorkers were nearly 9 times as likely to report difficulty obtaining food. 9 times. Like, we knew what the results would be, but I was shocked by the magnitude of that. Everything you'd expect was a problem: lack of transportation. And that was true not only in rural areas. We heard that from people who live in suburban and rural areas too. Of course, affordability is the #1 challenge. But not all is bad. Just some bright spots. About 90% of New Yorkers who participate in SNAP or WIC gave those programs very high ratings. Families whose kids get free school meals say the same. So very positive results for people who participate in those nutrition security programs. And yet more than a quarter of food insecure New Yorkers don't participate in any of those programs. So of course, again, preaching to the choir, we need a lot better work on outreach and enrollment so people get the benefits that they're entitled to. At the foundation, we're trying to do our part. The goal of the foundation's Healthy Food, Healthy Lives program is to connect New Yorkers with the food they need to thrive. We've got a lot going on, so I'm going to just share a few program themes and highlights. #1, we're working to harness the massive power of public purchasing to produce a healthier food environment. Through its agencies and institutions, New York State purchases and serves hundreds of millions of meals annually, primarily in low-income communities. New York City alone spends more than $500 million a year to serve more than 200 million meals. 200 million meals in schools, hospitals, long-term care facilities, homeless shelters, senior centers, child care centers, the list goes on. So that's the scale we're talking about. It is like massive and transformative if we could spend those dollars differently. So a leading model for change is the Good Food Purchasing Program, GFPP, because we don't have enough acronyms in our lives. But it's getting a lot of traction. Earlier this year, the legislature passed a bill. It passed the full state Senate to enact the Good Food Purchasing Program, passed all the key committees in the Assembly. And I'm pretty optimistic that a model like that can get over the finish line this year. Second, we support a range of food as medicine programs, including a really cool medically tailored meals programs centered on behavioral health issues. We've had a lot of food as medicine for cancer, diabetes, but what about behavioral health? We supported the launch of a statewide food as medicine coalition, and they just recently published a blueprint to integrate food and nutrition across New York State. Third, we're supporting regional and local food system planning in 8 places across the state. Like, we know that New York State is a big and diverse place. Brooklyn is not Buffalo, it's not Binghamton. Astoria is not the Adirondacks. So different regions are taking different approaches. Some are starting new farmers markets or urban farms. Some are working to change zoning to allow new supermarkets and other food access points. Some are establishing or scaling up a local food hub. The list goes on, and we're going to have a whole panel in a short while devoted to some of that local planning work. And finally, if you know anything about me, I'm going to talk about free school meals. You've probably heard me do it before. Free school meals improve physical health, mental well-being, and academic performance. It is proven that students who eat school meals every day have better diets than students who don't. They consume more fruits, more vegetables, more fiber, more whole grains. And when meals are free to all, the stigma and the same associated with school meals goes down and participation increases. The data is incontrovertible, and it is very hard to undo the damage to a child's psyche when they're taught from a very, very young age that they're somehow inferior, less than, less deserving than others. You know, until recently, food was the one part of public education where we discriminate by income. You know, when you need books, we don't say go stand in the poor line, but that's what we did with food. And obviously that's wrong. One of my proudest moments was when the city of New York made school lunch free for all 1.1 million of its students, regardless of income. We're the largest school system in the nation by far. The foundation, community food advocates, and so many others worked hard to make that happen. And of course, that just, you know, made us hungrier for more. And so this year, community food advocates, Hunger Solutions led the charge for free school meals statewide with tremendous success. The budget added an additional 135 million to expand and fund free school meals. An estimated 83% of statewide kids will now have the food they need to be healthy and learn well. This is a win for kids, a win for health, a win for equity. And if you want to applaud anything, you should applaud that one because I'm going to do it. So. We haven't made it to the promised land yet. Like New York has not made school meals universally free for all children, but we are getting there. And removing the financial barriers is a big part of the solution. It's not the whole story. School meals also have to be appealing. They have to be nutritious. They have to be culturally relevant. School cafeterias need to be places where kids would actually want to hang out and eat a meal. So we've had some real successes along the way, but we have so much work still to do. That's why we're here today. A big event like this has a lot of moving parts. I always say if it looks effortless, you can be sure it took a ton of work. That was the case with today's conference. So I must thank the foundation staff for making it all happen. I'm going to give a couple of specific call outs, particularly Julia McCarthy, Avital Havusha, Liz Ward, Bronwyn Starr, and Erica Van Boxtel. Those are the people who did all the heavy lifting and made this look so easy. So not just because you're showing me the sign, but it is time to get on with the show. So it is my very great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Luis Guardia. Luis serves as president of the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC. You can add that to your acronym list. FRAC is a leading national organization that works to end hunger in America, does that through advocacy and partnerships by advancing bold and equitable policies. Luis knows the importance of collaboration. He has been so effective in cultivating local support for policy change all across the country, including being the backbone of a lot of those winning free school meal campaigns. Luis arrived at FRAC in 2020. I don't know, great timing, Luis. So he really had his work cut out for him. We had to navigate the challenges and the flexibility for nutrition programs that occurred during the pandemic. And now maybe we're on the backside of that, but that also means the end of pandemic era benefits. So he's continuing to advocate for additional funding and flexibility for SNAP WIC school meals. Prior to joining FRAC, he was in leadership roles in global philanthropy, including Global Impact, the One Campaign, and the International Center for Research on Women. So he's going to come up here in just a moment. Following his remarks, we'll do some Q&A led by our VP for Programs, Avital Havusha. And the key part is you are part of that conversation. So if you have questions for Luis, write them down. You all got index cards. So when you walked in, should have plenty. We'll have people walking around, circulating to pick those up. And I promise you, we will work in as much audience participation as we can. So let's do it. Let's give a very, very warm welcome to Luis Guardia. We're so happy to have you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David, for that really warm and generous introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here, and particularly with a room full of leaders who are dedicated to transforming school systems. And you'll hear a lot of the themes in my remarks echoing the just really important points that David laid out. So again, as David mentioned, my name's Luis Guardia, and I'm the president of the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC. We have nothing to do with fracking or the extractive industries. We are working on making sure people understand that better. But the important thing to know about FRAC is we wake up every single morning to think about how to protect, strengthen, and promote the federal nutrition programs. The federal nutrition programs are key to reducing food insecurity and improving the nutrition, health, and well-being of people who are struggling against poverty-related hunger. No other intervention really quite matches their scale and reach. And you heard some of those examples in David's remarks. So in coming here, I was thinking about the theme of today, from pilots to policy. And it really resonated with me because it reflects a lot of how we approach advocacy at FRAC, and particularly around the issue of providing more access to healthy school meals for all of our children. So I want to talk about this in two ways. The first is we all need to be thinking big, and we all need to be thinking very boldly about what's needed to eliminate hunger and create equitable access to healthy food in a sustainable and dignified manner. And you heard David mention some of the quotes about where we are with that. So we know there are many significant issues that confronting policymakers in Washington. There are the looming fears of another government shutdown that can threaten important programs like WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children's Program that we are monitoring very closely, not to mention the big international crises in front of us. And there are many, many more. But it is because we are in this moment that it is so important that we continue to push for bold agenda items that can move this forward, and we must not lose momentum. We cannot accept that now, even despite these things, now is not the time to say that there's not enough resources, that this is not the right time to do it, or that there is not the political will. We can't. And among those reasons David highlighted is because of where we are with the state of hunger in this country. We have 44 million Americans who are living in households that are struggling against hunger. 44 million, think about that. The poverty rate has risen from 7.8% to 12.4% in 2022. Folks, that's the largest one-year jump on record, the largest. During the same time, poverty among children has more than doubled, from 5.2% to 12.4%. So clearly, the state of hunger and poverty in this country requires big solutions and bold thinking. Now, at FRAC, we believe that free, healthy school meals for all is one of these big, bold ideas that is essential and will make a huge difference. Now, going back to the beginning of the pandemic, David, thanks for reminding me at the auspicious time that I started. But one of the big interventions that you remember was when USDA allowed school meals to be offered for free to all students, regardless of their household income. And for more than 2 years, we actually did have an opportunity to pilot a nationwide free, healthy school meal policy. And so what were the results? The pandemic showed us that not only were we capable of doing it, it was also the right thing to do. And sure enough, students, families, teachers, and school officials, they all saw firsthand how free school meals reduced food insecurity with children and supported their academic success. In fact, many of them said they never want to go back to where students were paying different prices for the same meals, or as David was illustrating, put in different lines, or maybe even denied meals. Now, since then, over the last few years, 8 states have passed healthy school meals for all legislation. These include California, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, New Mexico, Vermont, Michigan, and Massachusetts. And many more are considering this policy. For example, like Nevada, who has used some of their pandemic relief that they received to cover the cost of school meals for 2 years. Now, different states have different approaches to doing this, and we've seen some of these policies pass as either standalone bills or part of larger budget bills, or in one state through a ballot measure. And now at the federal level, FRAC is proud to be pushing this forward, and we do this by convening a group called the National Healthy School Meals for All Coalition. This is a group of 18 national organizations that are committed to seeing healthy school meals for all legislation pass through Congress. And really what's very exciting about this work is how it brings varied groups together, much like probably the folks that are here today. In state coalitions, we have had this these coalitions successfully pass legislation. It's not uncommon to see groups of over 100 different organizations involved, because we know this is an issue that not only brings together the folks from my community, from the anti-hunger community, but we also have a representation from school nutrition groups, farm to school groups, unions, teachers, parents, healthcare organizations, and many, many more. And the thing that kind of brings us all together is that they all understand how access to healthy food is fundamental for both educational success and overall well-being. Now, the other great news is that this happens to be a policy that the majority of the public supports. 2 years ago, FRAC conducted a nationwide poll on this, and we found that 63% of voters support legislation that would make free, healthy school meals for all permanent. And since our polling, we've had the opportunity to do state-specific polling with certain groups, and we found in some places support at even greater levels. For example, right here in New York, the Healthy School Meals for All Coalition found that 77% of registered New York voters support state funding for healthy school meals for all. And that support held true across party lines, geography, income, race, and age. Incredible. In a time where we are with a lot of divisions, we believe this is something that people can come around. Now, many people understand intuitively, as David was saying, that hungry children can't learn, and children can't benefit from the educational investments if they're too hungry or to focus, or they simply don't have the energy to get through the school day. That's why we can no longer allow healthy meals to be a means-tested part of the school day. It doesn't make any sense. As we were hearing before, we don't do that with other critical elements of education, such as access to teachers or textbooks or transportation or technology. And with all the challenges students face today, I wonder, how does stigma in the cafeteria help? Or how does being shamed because their family has accrued too much meal debt, how does that help? Clearly, it doesn't. It just creates more obstacles to their well-being, and it creates more obstacles to inclusion. So I believe that these bold solutions like free, healthy school meals for all are possible, and they can become a reality. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we need to keep pushing for it. Now, my second point about the theme of today, from pilots to policy, also reminded me that some of these big changes that we look to do, they don't happen overnight. We need to keep a steady drumbeat of progress and celebrate the successes along the way. And David mentioned a few of them. Big wins are often start out small, and they're usually start out small in little areas that where they can be implemented and be replicated and then spread. A great example of this is the legislation passed in New York last session that was referred to that subsidizes schools that use community eligibility provision. So for years, community eligibility has allowed schools in high poverty areas to serve free school meals to students. And with the additional funding that's been allocated to support these schools, along with the USDA lowering the threshold for participation, New York now has more schools offering free school meals. I also want to take a moment to congratulate our friends at Hunger Solutions New York and Community Food Advocates for leading this change, along with all the other organizations that were involved to make such an important win possible. And New York isn't the only one taking steps towards healthy school meals for all. Last year, North Dakota expanded the number of students receiving free meals by expanding eligibility from 185% of poverty to 200% of poverty. In addition, they also passed legislation to prohibit any kind of student shaming over school meal debt. And also in Connecticut, we were Connecticut advocates were able to get dedicated funding to support the cost of free breakfasts for all students. So these are the kinds of wins that we want to continue working towards and that we need to celebrate both here and across the country to get to the ultimate goal. So with that big picture in mind, people say, well, what's next? What are we thinking about? Well, I'd like to close with a story that kind of paints that picture. At the bill signing event for Healthy School Meals for All legislation in Minnesota, one of the speakers was a student. And the student was very involved in the campaign. He testified to the Senate, to the committee hearings. He was an integral part of the campaign. And at the signing ceremony, he thanked the governor and he thanked the advocates for everything that they had been doing. And he closed remarks by saying, it's not just enough to provide us with free food. We need good food. We need healthy food. And that to me spoke to what we're really aiming towards, because we need not just to end hunger in America, we need to ensure that in doing so, that everybody has access to healthy food through the bold policy solutions I've laid out. But this needs to be culturally relevant and needs to be dignified. So as we continue the path towards making healthy school meals for all, let's keep in mind to be also thinking of other things that need to be a component to this. Thinking of innovative ideas such as meal quality, appeal, innovative service models, and providing enough time for children to eat. And there are probably many, many more that many of you are aware of. So this is why I was so excited to come here today, because as I think I've illustrated, and I think we all know, that it takes a community of people coming from different perspectives to make this happen. And looking around the room and seeing who's here, I feel that this is a community that's probably best positioned to show how some of these bold pilots that you all have done here in New York can lead to ultimate, even in bigger and bolder state policy solutions, and ultimately bold and equitable federal policy wins at the federal level. So thank you again so much for the invitation to share these thoughts with you, and for everything you all are doing to serve our communities.
Okay, thanks, Luis. That was great. I think you've set us up so well for the day, so I'm excited to jump into some more conversation that I think will set the stage for our two panels coming after. So before we get started, just as a reminder, David mentioned you might have gotten some cards when you walked in to jot down your questions, but please feel free to start jotting down your questions. There's folks in the aisle collecting them, and I'll make sure to try to get through as many as possible. But I'll kick us off with some initial questions, and then we'll go from there. So thanks again. I think I just wanted to dig into some of the themes that you raised around some of these effective campaigns, in particular, the states that have won healthy school meals for all, around what the secret sauce is of sorts of some of those effective campaigns. You touched a little bit on how students and families were involved, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what you see as that kind of secret sauce, whether it's a champion, students and families, engaging policymakers in a specific way.
Yep. Yes, 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 and yes. I can't underscore how important it is to make sure as people engage in this process that they do have that coalition. It is so important to have the voices of students and their parents and of teachers. But also, my organization, we're pushing for federal advocacy. We operate a lot with policymakers. So having that champion, that policymaker champion is so important in identifying them and backing them up as well, because they're not always with you, right? They're sometimes faced with opposing views, or in situations where they're trying to make the case for you. So it's important that that you have someone that you're working with and that can really stay strong during those times that can be trying. But yes, this is an effort that that really does require all those elements that we talked about.
And are there any particular things that you saw that worked well to engage families and students? I know here in New York, that was a big part of our campaign. I'm curious if there are models that you've seen work well in other places.
Yeah, so some of the coalitions that we've seen really work well have been able to work with the parents and teacher groups. They've been they've secured work and funding with key elected officials, like for example, we worked really closely with the California advocates when they passed Healthy School Meals for All, and the big champion there was Senator Skinner in the state Senate. So she was really open to hearing from but not just the state groups, but also the students and the teacher groups, but also worked really closely with the anti-hunger community. And in fact, one of the leaders of the big California anti-hunger groups transitioned into an office role with her. So yeah, it is sort of this multi-sector approach that you have to take, and it's important to keep that to keep those coalitions strong, and it's important to have folks like, I'll speak from my perspective, from the anti-hunger perspective, because we have been working really hard to reach out and make connections with both the public health community, with the education community. So finding those groups that can form the coalitions to organize the various groups is incredibly helpful.
Great, thanks. And shifting a little bit to, looking towards summer, as we all know, for the first time, USDA is now will be rolling out a program to offer summer EBT nationwide, but there is some action that states need to take to avail themselves of those dollars. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about what that looks like, what states and advocates can be doing now to support their states in taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah. So yes, summer EBT. So actually, it was almost exactly a year ago in the last omnibus that summer EBT was put in there and made permanent. And I think the current estimate is of over 30 million children in the United States could be receiving this. And it is such an important thing because we know that summer is when children are hungriest, are most hungry, I should say. I think for New York, I believe the deadline is January 1st to get summer EBT. So if people want to, and I don't know, I don't know if that's moved forward since last I checked, but certainly, you know, let your elected officials, let your public officials know that that's important. Ultimately, it's important for your governor to understand that as well. You know, it also it's important also sometimes to show people the economic benefit of some of this stuff. We talked about the educational benefit, the health benefits. I think if New York has summer EBT, that'll be about about $250 million worth of benefits coming into the state. That's not insignificant, and that can translate to somewhere around $400 million worth of additional economic activity. So, I mean, even if you don't care about feeding kids, which you know you should, you know, the economic benefits and the economic driver that some of these programs provide is just extraordinary and important to note sometimes.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think, you know, I'm sure there's some questions, additional questions about some of the summer meals and school food programs coming from the audience. So let's shift away from that a bit. And maybe we can just talk a little bit about beyond school meals. Obviously, FRAC is involved in a lot of other federal advocacy.
Yep.
And wanted to hear a little bit from you about what ways those of us in the state can be also effective in raising voices in terms of federal advocacy. Are there certain other issues that I'm sure there are that you have your eye on that we can be supportive of?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mentioned I focus on healthy school meals, but yeah, there are a tremendous amount of other federal programs that are important. SNAP being kind of like the flagship, right? It's our country's first line of defense against hunger. It is up for reauthorization as part of the big farm bill. And for those of you who've been following that, it probably doesn't appear that there will be a farm bill coming up. The sort of the latest wisdom is that there's going to be a year extension, but that might, but that will come. And one of the things that's important to note about the farm bill and SNAP is that it feeds you know, tens of millions of children also. So and their families. So it's an important, you know, it's an important part of the solution. And from our position at FRAC, we're approaching the farm bill from a position of saying we need to strengthen the program and we need to protect the program. One of the things that happened during the pandemic, people know, is that the USDA looked at the baseline for the SNAP program, which is the Thrifty Food Plan, and they did so because in the 2018 bipartisan Farm Bill there was a provision to relook at that. They did, and and sure enough, things like you know, people soaking beans overnight, or just a lot of different ways people approach food and how they prepare foods is needed to be updated. And and when they looked at that, because it gets updated for inflation, but they need to also look at, is this the right way people are eating and interacting with food? So that resulted in an increase, and we want to make sure that that's protected. We also have some more information on this on our website, frac.org, frac.org, that lays out some of our other priorities. There are 5 key market goals. I'll mention 2 of them just because they are driven by your congressional representatives. One is the Close the Meal Gap Act by Senator Gillibrand. That looks to have the baseline for SNAP be not at what we call the thrifty food meal plan, but at the low cost food meal plan, which would be a significant increase. And also Grace Meng, your Congresswoman from Queens, has introduced the Hot Meals Act, because again, a lot of people don't access food the way they did, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And since the program has been around, hot food has been prohibited from the SNAP program. We think that this would also allow for just more choice and more flexibility for SNAP customers. So certainly a lot to do there. The WIC program is one that we're working very hard on. That's been one that was sort of been in the crosshairs of the most recent budget deliberations. The WIC program is one where we're seeing more caseloads come up, and for a long time, it was one of the most underutilized programs. I think it was around half of eligible people who could access WIC were accessing it. It was continued in the last continuing resolution, and people were allowed, and USDA was allowed to spend more on that. But one of the things that we're concerned about is that with increasing caseloads, that there's going to be this huge cliff. Since USDA had the ability to spend more because of more caseloads, that if there's a government shutdown or if the funding goes away, there's going to be a huge drop, and that's going to really hurt moms and their very young children. So we're pushing for another $1 billion to go into WIC, which is really, really important. And of course, also we're looking at just a variety of other things. And all this is to say that there are other things that can continue to be done at the state and local level that I'm sure people in the audience are really pushing for.
Great. So one more question, then we'll move to some of the audience questions. Shifting gears a little bit, because we're here at our conference hosted by the New York Health Foundation. And I know from your background, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are some of the things that you think that philanthropy can be doing to, help move along some of these priorities, support some of this change, and also what opportunity we might have to raise up some of those community voices who are so important in these federal conversations?
Yeah. So philanthropy is huge, 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 huge. I can't say enough, particularly as an advocacy organization. Advocacy just doesn't sort of happen by itself. It's very labor intensive. It can be expensive. So it is so important that people in philanthropy, and a lot of them do understand the importance of advocacy. But it's important also to remind people, particularly when we see a lot of great work being done with folks in the charitable sector who are doing kind of direct service, and that's really important. It plays an important role. But like as we talked about before, these either state feeding programs or the federal feeding programs have enormous scale. They have enormous reach, and in order for us to see the changes that we want to see happen in terms of people getting more access, more equitable access, better results, healthier food, all that stuff, all that is done by us. It's done by advocates, right? And so it's important for philanthropy to understand that. The other important role that I think bears mentioning that the advocacy organization plays and philanthropy needs to understand is not only are we working to expand and make the programs better, our communities are also working to make it more inclusive, to bring more people in. Talk to anybody who's had to apply for SNAP or something like that. It's when I first encountered that application, it was like about that thick, and I was like, God, you need a CPA to complete this thing. This is nuts. How do people do this? So the programs aren't always accessible and easy as we would like. So it's important for us to bring down barriers, but at the same time, while we're bringing down the barriers, we also need the help of philanthropy and the help of the community to get more people in as well.
Great, thanks. So we're going to shift a bit to audience questions. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to jot them down quickly. So I'm going to go back to some of the questions about the Healthy School Meals for All campaign from the audience. So there are a few, but one is I thought you could just start with some of what you described in your remarks were around some of the work that FRAC is doing to advocate at the federal level for more expansive federal level policy. So one of the questions was around what does that advocacy look like at the federal level?
So it means when we have the opportunities to press for this, we do so, and we. I guess I should say at FRAC we lean a little harder into bigger, bolder policy solutions, and so for example, there was an opportunity I think sometime in the middle of the pandemic where universal meals came up, and it's we really want to make sure, and we understand that that the progress that we need to make through things like expanded community eligibility and states working on these issues is super important. But we really need to keep that pressure up at the federal level. I think right now, a little less than half of all school children in the country are getting are participating in schools that have some kind of free school meal program, and as we were saying at the very beginning, our goal is to not have this be a means tested thing where, oh, because you're a poor kid, you can't get the food, but because, but we don't make that distinction for some other things. So it's important for us to keep that pressure going. And that might come up. I know probably people are also thinking about child nutrition reauthorization. That would be the forum which it happens. This is the legislation that would cover the child nutrition programs at USDA that are not covered under the Farm Bill. I think right now, given that we do have an election year coming up, and we do have sort of Farm Bill kind of sort of first in the queue, if you will. As far as Congress is concerned, it might be a while before that opportunity comes up again. But continuing to ask for that, and let's not lower our sights. I mean, we know we're going to get further through some of these other means, but we just need to keep that pressure up at the federal level.
Great, thank you. And then building on some of the community level questions that are coming from the audience, one question around, the history of the National School Breakfast Program being rooted in some of the Black Panther free breakfast program, and how community-based organizing and grassroots organizing kind of plays into now how we organize to change policy. So curious to hear a little bit more about that community-based organizing that you mentioned. And then also, thinking about the difference in the types of communities, both here in New York and across the country, that question of rural and urban, and how we might think differently about some of our advocacy for those two communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. I cited some of the studies that we looked at, and this, access to free universal free school meals for all, there is very little dissension on that. It crosses party lines, it crosses income and ethnicities and racial disparities. So there is there is a huge opportunity to bring more people into the tent as possible. We've unfortunately, sometimes when it is sort of like a school lunch shaming issue or something like that sort of is the trigger that gets people to react. But it's important also to take some of the advantages. Like, for example, I remember watching a news story the other day, and there was one of these the more lighthearted news segments where they were focusing on this student who was having a lemonade sales stand to relieve school debt, and that's great. But the point that the story made is, like, there shouldn't be the school meal debt to begin with, right? Why should this other child be kind of worried about that? That should be something that the adults are tackling. And as far as the geographic consideration of rural and urban, we've seen support in both areas, and things like summer EBT are programs that can help bridge that divide as well, where people may not be that they might have access to a retail store that's a little bit more convenient than maybe getting food from their school, if that's where they usually go to get their summer meals, or even food banks. Sometimes they're not always the most accessible places. So leveraging the sort of the rails of commerce, if you will, the systems that we have in place right now is something we should definitely look at and can help bring some of those divides in.
Great. So, and a few more questions on the school meal front. One question was, you mentioned, one state in Colorado who did have a ballot initiative around, and you've mentioned a few times around the public support for such policies. Curious if, are there other states that that might be exploring a ballot initiative, or if that's something that's gaining traction in other places, and what might be the barriers if not?
Yeah. I haven't heard of other states doing the ballot initiative. Like most that I've seen have been through sort of budget measures.
Okay.
That's been the key one. Colorado had to do the ballot measure because they had this. I don't know if there's anyone here from Colorado, but they did have this sort of strange law that some of the additional revenue brought in couldn't be appropriated by the state legislature in a certain way that it did require a ballot initiative. So I think that was their initial angle, and then when they said they kind of encountered that that resistance, they kind of had do a turn and look at the ballot initiative, which ultimately being pretty successful, and that I believe. I'm not going to be too terribly specific about it, but I believe it was having people in higher income brackets forsake some tax deductions in order to pay for the healthy school meals, and so that was something that couldn't be done just through the legislature or through a budget resolution.
Great. And then I think one last question on the school meals front. Curious, you've mentioned a bit about media, but is there anything more you can share about what kind of media approaches have worked well, what we could maybe learn and apply in different places?
Yeah. I mean, kids sell, right? Having children involved is important, and I think it's it's important to continue to remind the broader public that as we were saying before, this probably one of the most important things you can provide children for a good learning environment is nutrition, and we're not providing that equitably, and reminding people of that, and sort of ask the question, why is that? Why is it that we work so hard to get transportation more equitable, but we haven't been able to do that with food? We've seen that. We've seen some good response to that. But I think again, showing also how this resonates across different income groups, responds well across different demographics. This is something that everybody is really anxious to get behind.
Great. And kind of building on this idea of using learnings from one area to another, one of the questions is around, do you think there's ways of using some of the advocacy and implementation strategies around school meals that we could apply to other areas like food as medicine, like produce prescription programs, scaling those types of projects that have been much smaller scale in comparison to school meals programs?
No, that's a really interesting question, and I think there is, right, because right now we do have nutrition standards for school meals. We have nutrition standards for programs like WIC, and emerging programs like food as medicine can certainly learn from that, and can probably maybe even help achieve greater success in these other programs. WIC. The WIC program is one of the sort of these jewels that we have in the federal nutrition programs, and kind of reminds people about the importance of nutrition. Like, for example, at my own grocery store, I noticed that now they have like little WIC stickers on the shelf that can kind of guide people and tell them, okay, this is a healthier option for you. And in and certainly and even other ones, we haven't talked about one called the CACFP program, which is the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, the Federal Nutrition Program that provides support for child care centers and older adult centers as well. But this is, and a lot of these small child care centers are where a lot of working families have their kids, and so they need support, and they need help for healthy access to high quality foods as well. So yeah, I think there is a lot to learn there, but I also think there's a lot to learn, not just from these federal programs to support things like food as medicine, but some of the emerging conversations that we're having at the local level. One of the I mentioned really briefly, the farm to school groups. These are initiatives that are really exciting because not only can they provide higher quality food to local schools and maybe even childcare centers or other places, but they're also parts of that driver of economic change and getting more local economic growth, which is also what policymakers like to see.
Absolutely. And teeing us up nicely for our next panel. So thank you for mentioning that. So a few more questions.
Yeah.
One, this is harkening back to something specifically you were talking around some of the federal advocacy, and I'm not sure if you'll have a sense of this, but one of the questions was around in, excuse me, the 70s and 80s, there were more frequent adjustments for inflation in the SNAP program, like every 6 months. Have you seen any movement around make those conversations? How can we get back to that place where we might be adjusting for inflation more frequently given the rise in food costs?
Yeah. No, that would be great. I haven't seen that come into play right now. I think one of the things that we've been focused on is making sure that we don't take a step back, and that's a possibility. As kind of odd as it is to say those, and I see the words come out of my mouth like, no, that can't be true. Yeah, but it is. I mentioned earlier in one of the other questions how USDA did what it was instructed to do to increase the Thrifty Food Meal Plan, and that increased the overall benefit by about 20% thereabouts. And some people believe that they shouldn't have done that. And so that's one of the things that when we talk about protecting and defending the programs, that's one of the areas that we want to make sure that we defend, and that we certainly don't roll it back. And certainly even the bill that I mentioned that Senator Gillibrand has sponsored, that would be tremendous. I mean, right now the average SNAP benefit $6 per person per day, $6. So yes, we know SNAP, the first S is supplemental, and people can use some of their own income to buy food, and there's food that they access at food banks. But we know that there's some, particularly on the charitable side, sometimes there are barriers to that. And we hear the stories all the time about people struggling between paying medical bills or paying for food or paying for rent or paying for food or paying the electricity bill or paying for food. I mean, these things are real. So that $6 per person per day, doesn't really get people very far. So it's really important that we look at that, and that particularly in the environment where people are struggling this, and as you mentioned, we have the rising food inflation as well.
Right. One of the questions was actually about, I'm not sure if you'll have some insights on this, on how, if there are models in other countries where maybe there's a stronger social safety net around providing meals or other food access programs.
Yeah, there are. There are some. We were talking before. A lot of the work that I'd done was in East Africa on this stuff, and in India. There's some of the European countries that have pretty well developed social safety nets around this stuff, and there are ways where we can get creative around it as well. I mean, one thing I haven't mentioned so far are programs like the child tax credit. Child tax credit was estimated to cut child poverty in half, and it cut child poverty about in half. And now that was pulled back, as I mentioned earlier, it's doubled again, right? It's the inverse. So while we have these nutrition programs that is designed to get people better access to healthy food, we also know that in these households, food is often a trade-off, and we hear a lot, the rent eats first, right? So other programs, other social safety nets like the child tax credit are so important. Also during the pandemic, because we believe that at the root cause, people are hungry because they're poor, and people can't access food because of sometimes, yes, there are geographical accesses and they're food deserts. Yes, we need to work to solve that, but a lot of times it's because people just don't have enough money. And they have to sacrifice either quantity or quality of food to make ends meet, and they try to make the best decisions that they can. So we need to make sure that that our government is thinking about it holistically, not just in terms of things like the child tax credit, but even things like minimum wage, and making sure that that people have can have a good standard of living in this country to be able to provide for themselves and their family. Because ultimately, I would love it if we could, in my mind, get the SNAP numbers down, because I think we ultimately want to see people be able to access food in the most dignified way possible, and that is through their own economic agency, and that comes through economic empowerment and greater equitable and dignified opportunity. And there are a lot of barriers to that. I mean, we could talk about economic barriers. We talk about structural racism. There's, the list goes on. So there's a lot of there's a lot of work to be done there, and it's important to think about it holistically, I think.
Yeah, that's helpful. And then kind of shifting back to some of those economic drivers and maybe the private sector a little bit. One of the questions was how the restaurant industry might be able to play a role in fighting food insecurity, and even supporting school systems. So curious if that's been part of your work.
Yes, I mentioned Grace Bang's bill, the Hot Meals Act. So there are great opportunities there for the restaurant community to play in terms of alleviating food insecurity. We know that the restaurant community participates a lot with the charitable sector, but if we we see a lot of people, leaders in the food industry, chefs and others, stepping up and being more active in the advocacy realm, which is great. Everybody follows chefs, on social media and on their TV shows and their films. So they have a tremendous voice to play. And so, we certainly invite the restaurant community and that group and to really, leverage their voice, not just for the important work that they are doing in terms of what they can do through their own businesses and their own distribution, but also lift up the important advocacy work that needs to be done, because they have a really special and unique voice, because not only celebrities, but they're also very close to the food system as well, and they understand how it all works. And yes, so amen, and twice on Sunday, I say.
Yeah. And we might get a chance to talk a bit more about the role that chefs are playing in some of the New York City school systems in our next
Please.
panel. So
Yeah.
great. So we'll end on this question. It's a little bit more of a big question, but might give you a chance to just, leave us maybe on a positive note and a charge to go ahead. So, one of the biggest questions is, if it makes so much both economic and moral sense to make sure that, children and families have the food they need to thrive, why is it so hard to make the argument?
I don't find it. Sometimes it's hard for people to accept it, right? I think yes, we heard this. We hear this a lot, and I remember hearing this a lot from people in Congress during the pandemic about the numbers and the budget. But I think it is there is this notion in this country that we need to be. I think one of the things that's important for us to kind of get around is this notion of the deserving poor. Who is worthy of philanthropy, who is worthy of charity, who's worthy of support. I think one of the things that and I'm hopefully seeing some of this change through a lot of the conversations we've been having in this country over the pandemic about what are the situations and what are the circumstances that other people are dealing and living with that other people who probably are in more privileged positions, and that includes policymakers, don't always see. So it's I do believe that, if you do look at the numbers, you kind of say, well, why don't we do more of this? This makes total sense. I think that getting more people connected and understanding of the plights of people who are living in poverty in this country is important. Unfortunately, income inequality is growing, and that division is growing. So we need to do a better job of bringing those people together and understand, and having people understand that there are a lot of these structural barriers that are getting people from the economic opportunity that they want to have, and that people people don't wake up in the morning and are excited about going on to SNAP or some of the other social benefit programs. It's like I mentioned, it's hard. It's sometimes often degrading and dehumanizing. We need to change that. We need to make it better. But ultimately, have people, get people in positions of authority to understand that it's through economic growth, through job growth, through steady employment and good wages, that's the way we believe that we're ultimately going to get greater equity. I mean, that's the sort of capitalist system that we have. That's the system that we have to work with, but government needs to intervene where there's not that possibility. But yeah, it's tremendously important. I think we are seeing the results of. We're seeing both things. We're seeing the benefits on the economic side, but we are also seeing some of the harm that can come when these things are pulled back. So it is. I think we're at the moment now where we're really seeing not just it all play out in theory, but we're seeing it play out kind of in the real world, and it's a moment where we can really make tremendous change in a positive way. But it requires work, it requires advocacy, it requires engagement.
Thank you. So on that note, I think we'll wrap up and we'll get going to our panel sessions where we'll talk a little bit more about what change people are making happen. So I really just wanted to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I think your remarks have set us up for a really great conversation for the rest of the morning. So we'll be talking in a few minutes on our next panel. Julia McCarthy, our Senior Program Officer, will be leading us in a discussion about institutional food and culturally relevant institutional food. We're going to take a minute to set the stage back up. So in the meantime, I just wanted to give a big thank you to Luis, and we'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
CJI.
What?
Okay, cool. Love CJI.
Okay.
It's a great organization.
It is a great organization.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to begin. As Abital said, I was a public school teacher. I can wait. It's fine. I'm Julia McCarthy. I'm the Senior Program Officer here at the New York Health Foundation. I'm delighted to have you all in the room. And if you haven't had a chance to say hello, I'll be around for a long time afterwards. Please do come up. There's only one of me and so many of you, and I'm so excited you're here. So just wanted to start by that, saying that. Just another reminder, if you have questions, please fill out the cards. You can pass them to the sides and we'll be taking them at the end. We'll have a long time for questions because I find when I go to panels, my favorite part is hearing what people in the audience have to ask of the experts on the stage. So we want to have that time as well. So we're going to talk about cultural relevance of foods today. When we think of what does that even mean? So we'll start with, thinking about collard greens, chicken adobo, matzo ball soup. These are foods that you think of when you think of, long Sunday suppers, of big family parties, of your mother soothing your head when you're sick, right? These are the kinds of foods that are of joy, of safety, and of comfort. These are the kinds of foods that advocates are calling our schools, our senior centers, and our hospitals to be serving. And so often this conversation about cultural relevance really is framed in the negative, right? It's framed as a lack of food that reflects the cultural diversity of the people for whom the foods are for. It's a conversation that often oversimplifies the food and the people for whom that food is important. And it's a conversation that, if you're not careful, can so quickly devolve into stereotypes. And we're not going to have that kind of conversation today. We're going to have a conversation about how food and cultural foods are a place of power, they're a place of opportunity. And we're going to talk about how, through the thoughtful inclusion of different meaningful foods, we can actually start to shift the dominant food culture in so many American food institutions. So here with me today, I have advocates who are pushing for policy change in a variety of settings across New York. People who are pushing for the inclusion of more meaningful foods and in turn putting more meaning into the term of cultural relevance. So right next to me, I have Nina of Food for the Spirit, where she leads the Buffalo Food Equity Network. It's a grassroots movement for Western New York's new food economy, led by communities of color for communities of color. Next to her, I have Nashla. Nashla is a senior director at the Correctional Association of New York, which is a statewide prison oversight organization. And in that role, Nashla oversees monitoring visits to prisons across the state. Her team authors reports and conducts research and analysis. And on the far end, we have DJ. DJ is a food policy manager at Met Council, which is an organization dedicated to fighting poverty. DJ is responsible for research, analysis, and advocacy at the local, state, and federal levels for Met Council. So DJ, I'm going to start with you. This is a very basic question. We're here to talk about culturally relevant foods. It's a term that's thrown out around a lot, but what does it actually mean? And what does it mean specifically in the context of emergency food?
Yeah, thank you, Julia, and thanks for having us all today. Great to be up here with everybody. I think cultural relevant food really starts with culture, which I think is, in my mind, it's sort of the lens through which we all view the world. It's like, what we learned growing up and how we interact with different systems and institutions throughout every single day of our lives. I think, like, for me, I'm like a second generation Armenian immigrant to this country, and culture is how my family, when they immigrated, they came together, they told stories, they held family history, they maintained a sense of who they were and where they came from. That was really important to them. I think Met Council, we serve everybody. We serve about 200,000 people a month, but we do focus on kosher and halal food, and we serve exclusively kosher and halal food to communities that require those foods. And so for those communities, I think culture is about the same things. It's about diaspora, and it's about understanding, where you come from and how you relate to your family, and also how you utilize food. I think it's really important that when we're providing emergency food service to people, we're giving them foods that they both understand and that they want to eat and that they want to share with their children, that they want to have for maybe a celebration or a holiday or something like that. It's about sort of moving away from a model of like, you get what you deserve, or you know, that like you shouldn't ask for more if you're struggling with poverty. I think it's really about like respecting our clients and respecting the place that they hold in the world, and what's important to them. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard you talk about this a lot, but the idea of deserving poor versus like undeserving poor. And it was also interesting to hear that come up in Luis's remarks. And I was, you know, I think that's a theme that we'll talk a lot more about today, but it is one that is at the crux of sort of like so many of the problems that we deal with when it comes to the food system here, I think. So, you know, I think it can seem a little more obvious for people why religious observant communities might need specific foods, right? And what cultural relevance could mean in the context of kosher or the context of halal. But I think cultural relevance, what that can mean in a carceral setting may not seem so obvious. You know, what does it mean for prison food to be culturally relevant, to be sort of blunt? And Nashla, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more about this. You know, why is this so important? And I think many people are probably less familiar with how food is served in carceral institutions. So can you give a little background on that as well?
Sure. So, I mean, as DJ said, food is ingrained in our culture, and culturally relevant food is a way for people to express themselves, connect with others, pass on traditions, and the desire and the need to have that doesn't stop because you go to prison. In prisons, there is a recognition that they need to meet nutritional standards, minimum nutritional standards for incarcerated people, but there isn't a recognition about the importance of food and cultural expression. So in New York State, there are 44 state prisons with about 32,000 incarcerated people. People are offered 3 meals a day, breakfast at around 7 a.m., lunch at around 11, and dinner at around 3 p.m. And food is the different sources for food in prisons is the mess hall, which is like the cafeteria, commissary, which is where people buy food items and also toiletries and other things, and also packages, right? Family members can send packages. This year, in the last 2 years, there's been changes in the package policies. And so there's been a shift in how family members can no longer send things directly from their homes. Things need to be bought off approved vendor lists. And that, of course, changes the dynamic because now things are more expensive and family members can no longer cook these special meals and pack them and send them to their loved ones. They now have to buy things from different stores and send them.
I think one of the things that really shocked me, and I'll say this, like, especially from a place of privilege and naivete, like that it turns out that in, at least as you've gone sort of anecdotally across, and you're doing this more systematically, I know, but that less than half of people are actually eating in the mess hall, right? And so when you first talked to me about those prison packages, you know, again, from a place of privilege, I thought like college care package, like your mom sending you cookies. Like, no, the reality is we're talking something like much more Dickensian, right? Like that people are getting a huge portion of their calories paid for by their families from outside being shipped in, or purchasing cup noodles in the commissary, right?
Exactly.
And I think, I mean, something else that you've, like Candy has talked about that I'm so interested in is how food can be used for celebration within prisons, and why that's important. Like, I think there was an example about Diwali. Could you talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, definitely. So I forgot to mention that the majority of the food is made at the facility level. But there are items that are made at one facility in the food production center, and then that gets shipped to the 43 other facilities across the state. there are some prisons, like in Maine. We've had an opportunity to visit the Maine State Prison. They're really thinking differently about the food and the relationship with food and cultural competence. And so at a recent visit, they have the food menu is decided by each prison has, its own food service manager. Currently, there's one that used to be a chef, and so the food that they create there is food that's purchased from local farms.
Is it in Maine? Or,
Yeah, in Maine. Food that's purchased from food that is grown in the prison through their harvest program, their horticulture program. And at a recent visit, they were talking about creating a menu for Diwali celebration that incarcerated people had requested. And so the ability to have the chef, the person who was a former chef, who can come up with menus and workshop, okay, what do we have this from that has come from the horticulture program that can be included in something like this, and plan ahead to create culturally relevant food that many people can enjoy and break bread with.
And how would you, I mean, I can hear critics saying, like, these people are in prison, they shouldn't have celebration. Like, how do you respond to that?
I mean, it's a human dignity thing, right? Incarcerated people are human beings, and there are currently about 2 million people incarcerated in all of the US, and 85 to 90% of those people will eventually come home. And, we expect them to come home and be returning citizens that are contributing to society, and they are oftentimes spending decades in these institutions where they are coming home sick because of the lack of nutritional food, coming home with bad eating habits, and which will then, once they come out, they face food insecurity, and will probably need to use services like Met Council's services.
I think I'm going to nudge you one more time, because I loved, like, this story was so telling for me, but the story about the man who went to the grocery store, could you share that with them?
Yeah, I was at a conference recently at a food in prison session, and there was a formerly incarcerated man there who was telling us a story about how he had been in prison for 20 plus years, was finally home, had been spending time with family, and they went to the supermarket together, and they each had their own shopping cart, and they were going around. They met up at the register, and his family member went first, and she's putting down all the things that she chose, and it hits him. He looks at the register and looks at his cart, and he's like, everything that she had picked is actual food, like beautiful, colorful, fresh food. And everything that was in his cart was packaged, unhealthy food. And he's like, and I'm still picking my food like if I was in prison, because he didn't eat in the mess hall. Most of his meals were made from items that he purchased in the commissary, and the commissary has items that are cup of noodle, like you said, and other unhealthy items.
And I think it's such a good example of when you don't let people, like, celebrate their own culture, that you're actually acculturating them to something different. You're creating a new culture. It's not like there's an absence of culture. There's a new culture coming in. And that's, in this case, one of packaged foods and one of operating on scarcity. Nina, that's something that I've heard you talk a little bit about, that it's not it's not an absence of culture. It's a different kind of culture. And you work, the Buffalo Food Equity Network focuses on schools, which is a very different sort of institution, than emergency food or carceral situations. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your work in schools and react to, what that means to be creating culture.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be on this panel as well with some amazing people. And I'm kind of glad I went last, because I feel like my response connects a lot to the two things that my colleagues here spoke about. So, when you think about creating a culture, the Buffalo Food Equity Network is really just a group of folks who are thinking about food in a different way and who look a lot like myself and many of you in this audience. And what that means is we start to explore ideas where we recognize that if we don't change the trajectory of the food that we're introducing to our students, it sets them up to be prepared to enter into your institution at some point. And that's a whole different conversation, right? The school to prison pipeline, but we know that there are connections, right? And you have to culturize, or I'm not sure the word you use, but you have to,
I was like, did I use the real word?
I'm not even sure, right? But you have to assimilate a child to prepare them to be an adult that can survive in that environment. And some of those first steps, right, are introducing them to the foods that we see in a lot of our cafeterias that they're not eating at home, but perhaps they maybe don't have the option at home. So after decades of being in, school system where you've adjusted to lack of nutritious food or food that meets the bare minimum of nutrition standards, it doesn't equip you to make any different choice when you get older, or to put yourself in an environment where those options are available for you. And then to advocate for folks, to make that change. And it just becomes a cyclical example of folks who are, older than myself, who think there's nothing wrong with the kids eating junk in the cafeterias as long as it's free. But I think we have to look at, like, there are two sides. If we're covering the costs, we can't just give them slop. And that goes in any place where we're serving food: hospital, prison, schools. And so folks are definitely gathering together and building coalition around all the different components that are needed to disrupt that process.
And I think, there's this idea of, like, again, like harkening back to the deserving poor versus not, like there's a general sort of myth or story that, whatever kids get in school, like adults have carefully picked, and people, but it can't be too expensive, it can meet certain standards. It's usually better than, the foods that are traditionally served in emergency food or in carceral settings. But yet we know that parents aren't happy. In the survey that David mentioned that we did at NYHealth Foundation, we know that 80% of white parents were happy with the food that was served in schools, and less than half of Black parents, and only a third of Asian parents, for example. And so that just, to me, was like a really important fact to think about, like, who are we listening to and who are we asking questions of, and then who gets to set the story of, like, what's acceptable, right?
Yeah. I think that, sorry, you're talking about this conversation of deserving and undeserving. It's very jarring for me, because I think I don't think we need to put the word poor at the end of that, right? I think in general, our systems are set up to decide that some folks are deserving and undeserving, and whatever we're talking about, whatever the topic is, you gotta just get, where the chips fall. And so I see the differences in how people consider what is the standard based on, like, geography. Inner city schools are usually not considered top priority in terms of, like, where they land on the food supply chain. So, I'm sure the kids in Long Island are eating much different than the kids in the Bronx, and same can be said for, like, my son, who, started in Buffalo Public Schools. I'm co-parenting across 2 states, and now he's in school in a suburban Ohio school, where his first statement to me was like, "The food is better, Mom. I'm excited, the banana bread, they have options for breakfast. Like, I have never seen a child in Buffalo Public Schools talk about fresh banana bread, So to
Good
think,
job, Ohio.
right? And to think you just, across a state line, right? And it's, again, based on the policies that are being set, I think, regionally. And so my organization is looking at, like, how do we bridge those gaps? Because if we know in a suburb 20 miles away that their standards are different than the inner city, over here, there's a missing link in why that's happening. And we need to be doing the work right there to connect that, because if it's okay here, but it's not okay here, then it's just not okay, and there needs to be a new conversation about what the standard is.
So you are working with Buffalo Public Schools. Can you tell us a little bit about how you can start that conversation, what that looks like, and why this process is so important?
Yeah, so I was brought into our organization this year and getting really a holistic look at, like, food systems. It's culinary, it's the recipes, it's the food prep, it's the aggregator, people moving the food. It's really a whole system. And I think at first, Buffalo Public Schools approached, my employer, recognizing that there was a connection with like youth engagement that was previously being made with different folks who work in our organization. And Buffalo Public Schools is very interested in trying to include as many folks in the conversation around meals and what they're doing with their school meals. There's a lot of push to build a new commissary and a lot of things to change what we're doing in that region for food wise. But I think what is like not happening, or what is still being missed from the school's perspective, is they have to think about the money, the bottom dollar first. So they're not looking at programs that connect like culinary education and agricultural education for the student, who can set themselves up to be a food service worker, to provide, like there's no understanding that the lunch lady has a culinary background. There's not even any respect that she might, and no one's really asking her or him to have that expertise, right? They just want you to be a body to serve things on a plastic, sheet and make sure it's done on time. And I think the whole idea that like what we're feeding our people has to connect to how we're growing the food and how we're preparing it, and then how it arrives and how we price it, so that everyone can access a good meal. All that has to be in the conversation, and schools can't think about that holistically, right? They are relying on community-driven organizations to bring that research and to bring in those pilots that can give them, a better case for pushing for the Board of Ed and pushing for New York State legislatures to implement things on the policy level that will then require the institutions to follow suit.
I mean, it's really interesting to hear you say like schools don't have the capacity to do that. And yet I think schools are a much more sympathetic institution towards change than say, carceral systems or emergency food. And so I want to pose those questions to you, DJ, and then you, Nashla. Like if you say we want to provide culturally relevant foods, or we want to take steps to even get there, where do you start? And how are you assessing what that even means with the community?
I mean, I think for us, it's, and I just want to go back to one thing.
Yeah, please at any point jump in. It's way more fun when you're talking to each other.
Yeah, and to address some of what Nashla was saying, I didn't know that stat about sort of how much folks rely on commissary versus mess hall. But to me, that's also somewhat of what happens in the emergency food world, where if you're not providing food that people want or know how to use or know how to eat, they're not going to avail themselves of your resources. Or they're going to, like it was said earlier, like rent eats first, and that it's going to like make people sort of go hungry or have to scrape by in a different way if we're not able to provide culturally relevant food to folks. I think for Met Council, we're in a unique space where we are both, somewhat of a food bank, not a Feeding America affiliated food bank, but we do food banking. We provide food to like 100 pantries a month. But we also operate a handful of pantries ourselves. And so we sort of have the perspective of like the larger wholesale organization, but we also like interact directly with our end users. We interact directly with pantry providers that are meeting with clients on a daily basis and providing services to them. And so I think we really approach this and try to create change, understanding sort of like a whole set of the system, from sort of like large scale food procurement and what that means for our organization, but also like what our clients want, what they need, how they interact with our systems and with our staff. And we're able to sort of like utilize that direct input from folks who are interacting with emergency food systems. And that's really where we start. And that's really how we think about change. And I think one of the things I've learned as I've gotten more into this work is that that's a voice that has traditionally not been included in a lot of these conversations. For better or worse, there's a very large emergency feeding system in this country, and it's often run from a very large perspective because that's the most efficient way to do it. The most efficient way is to give you hundreds of thousands of cans of some food that you can provide to a lot of people, and we need a large scale supply of food, but that's also generalizing hundreds of thousands of people who have different needs, who have different health concerns, who in our case have different religious dietary restrictions. And I think what we're learning, and especially sort of coming out of the pandemic, is that when a lot of people are hungry, there's a lot of different ways that hunger looks and feels. And there's a lot of different food needs, be it in New York City, be it the difference between New York City and Buffalo, I'm sure, or in different states across the country. And unless we're sort of getting the inputs from the end users who are the consumers of the food, we're really not meeting their needs. And so I think for us, it's really about like, how do we get the most input that we can from folks who are interacting daily with the emergency food system? I mean, part of
Are
the-
there like examples of changes that you've been able to make or that you're considering?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been pushing really hard at a lot of different levels of government. I think one of the best examples of changes that we're able to make is, and I'm sure folks in this room are familiar with this, but during sort of the height of COVID, the city started providing emergency food through a program called PFRED that provided a lot more fresh produce, something that like was traditionally not included in the city's emergency food program. And then as we transition to, you know, a post-COVID world in some ways, the city sought to integrate that fresh produce and that additional new food product into their emergency food system and renamed it. It's called Community Food Connections now. But in doing that, they sought to like rebid the program and to go out to a new vendor and improve the program in a way that would include sort of somewhat more traditional emergency food products, but also access to fresh protein and fresh produce and things like that. And when they were making that transition, very thankfully, they came, HRA and the Mayor's Office of Food Policy came to organizations like us and like other large providers in the city and asked us sort of what our needs were, what we wanted to see out of an RFP process. And through our input and through working with these organizations, we were able to push the city to bid for a vendor who could provide more culturally relevant food. And we went from a program of EFAP that didn't have much kosher and halal product to now CFC, I think last I checked, has over 70 kosher certified products, which like for us is amazing. There's, in my knowledge, there's never been a food program that's offered more than maybe a handful of certified food products in that way. And so that's like one way we're really like both proud of the success that we've had and grateful for the interactions that we've had with the city. And it also shows us that it's possible to bid a program for emergency food that takes into account the different needs of different folks. And it makes us hopeful for stuff we can maybe try to accomplish at other levels of government.
I'm going to put it to you, Nasha, if that's okay. What are ways in which you're engaging with individuals who are in carceral situations to figure out what kinds of foods they like to see or what changes?
So in 2020, Annie did a statewide survey, surveyed a portion of the population to learn more about their experiences with food in prison. So that's one way. And during that survey, we learned that 90% of the people who had responded to the survey said that they did not eat at the mess hall because the food was disgusting. The food didn't taste good. It was unappealing. Oftentimes there were moldy food or vermin in the food. I don't know if you guys saw in the last few months, there was a DOJ Office of Inspector General report that came out about food in a Bureau of Prisons facility in Florida. It was a women's facility where they did an unannounced visit and they went in and they saw food trays being served with moldy food. They saw areas where food is stored having vermin. And then another way that we engage with people is when we do our monitoring visits, right? Food is one of the top 3 concerns that we always hear about. And also the fact that people don't want to eat in the mess hall and need to buy stuff from the commissary, then it's a cost thing, right? Items in the commissary are expensive. If a family member can't put money into someone's account, incarcerated individuals in prisons work, but they earn 15 cents to 60 cents an hour every week. And so that's not enough when you're trying to decide, do I buy shampoo or do I buy a box of ramen noodles or a jar of peanut butter, right? Like if you don't eat in the mess hall or you go to the mess hall, you're allowed to bring back 4 slices of bread with you back to your cell or your housing area. And then, you know, dinner is at 3 p.m. So between 3 p.m. and 7 a.m. the next morning, you know, people get hungry. What do you eat? You you figure out things that you're buying in the commissary. So every time we're in a prison visit, we hear from people about the food. Incarcerated people also can call our office or write to us. And so in addition to food, access to health is another of the top concerns. And as we all know, food is life, right? And food impacts your health, your mental health.
I mean, I had the privilege of going with you on one of these sites visits, and I think two really big takeaways, at least for me, were number one, seeing the food production facility in New York State. I mean, it's huge. There's millions of dollars that have been invested in it, and to think that there's going to be some change. I mean, first we need to understand, like, is there a need for a change? And you all are working on that right now, looking at that. But if there is going to be a change, it's such an uphill battle for that fight, because there is, such an investment in that space. And, the other takeaway was that, food, health access are two of the top three concerns, but there's physical safety trumps everything else. So to even get airtime to talk about this is it's a basic human right. And yet it's competing with like the most serious thing, which is life, right? Like physical safety. And I saw some people cooking in the facility, and those were only the people who had the privilege of buying fresh food at the commissary. And that was only a very, very, very small fraction of the people. And they could buy like eggs and like a cucumber or a carrot, I think. That was pretty much it. So it was, it painted a very specific picture there.
Yeah, some facilities have refrigerators in the unit, but it's not all of them. Some facilities have cooktops. And, speaking about the importance of food and connecting with others, people in the housing units who have the ability to use these appliances will cook food together. I mean, even people that don't have these appliances in their units will cook food together, right? Like they will
Creating community.
Right. They will pull items from commissary that they have and create a meal together. Like I've seen that happening whenever we're touring the different housing areas.
So this is a policy conference, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about policy opportunities. Nina, I'm going to start with you. Are there, current federal, state, or local opportunities that you see to improve the cultural relevancy of food in schools, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be excited about because there's a lot of work to do. So potential is really endless. And prior to coming here, I made sure I just checked in like with the Buffalo Public Schools food service director, to make sure I really had some perspective on like institutionally what are some of the obstacles they're facing, and how then from like a parent or community member standpoint, why we feel like there's lack of results. And a lot that is missing from the dialogue is how we're preparing schools and other institutions to have a supply chain that can meet the demands of this cultural relevancy. So if you'd like everyone to have chicken adobo, how is the supply chain set up so that everyone, no matter what your facility, if your facility has a hot stove or if your facility has a refrigerator, the standardization isn't there for us to, on a large scale, implement some sort of like mass change to the meal offerings, and then it doesn't support the need to, well, why do you need a chef then if everyone can't even get the chicken? And why do you need to introduce people to, fresh food if some people can't even cook it? It's just, it becomes too nuanced of a conversation. And, what I was reminded of is it's great that we're paying for all the meals for the schools, but we still deal with supply chain issues and shortages if, we find that elementary school kids are gravitating towards a certain part of the meal offerings more than the high school children are. And if there's no facility and no supplier that can meet these demands in real time, you just end up back in the same cycle of, in order to serve everybody food, some kids are still eating that nasty chicken patty, or that pizza or whatever it is for the sake of like, well, we're meeting the guidelines, the school paid for it, and we have to serve it at a certain time. But that is not, that's not like sustainable you know, in terms of thinking about a new way, a bigger, bolder way, as Louise was saying earlier, right? We must be fierce and bold in our changes and how we look at feeding people, because it is integral to all livelihood. And like you said, it should be easiest to sympathize at the school level for children, because you set the stage for folks like us to be on this panel to care about food, you know, right? Some folks are just like, whatever, because they've been trained to think a certain way or believe that they don't have another option. And so we are definitely seeing that as much as we talk about giving meals away, we have to prepare the supply chain. We have to think about it holistically, from the farmer to the lunch lady, you know, make sure that they have a relationship, because if she doesn't understand why they're getting lettuce for salads, you know, if there's no connection, then that's why the salad bar looks a hot mess and then the kids don't even want to eat it, you know, like there has to be the synergy and the relationships from all the suppliers. And so it takes the community input, pushing and supporting the institutions to say, like, it's not enough to just meet the bottom dollar.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd be remiss not to give out a shout out to American Farmland Trust, which has been leading the, you know, push for additional farm to school incentive in New York State, and I think helping to get some more of that local product and getting farmers connected to
Yeah.
schools. So that's just a huge
And a good food
opportunity.
purchasing
And a
program.
good food purchasing program, of course. So just, you know, two programs that I think you're all aware of, but just giving them a shout out because they are so important to sort of just changing the way we think about school food. And I also just, I love when you talk about sort of like process and democratic, like that this is a democratic issue, or like linking people, you know, making sure that voices are heard in all of these processes, right, in the policy development.
Yeah.
Nashla, I'm gonna go to you. What are some policy opportunities? Or are there?
I mean, I think that recently Governor Hochul did an executive order that requires all state agencies, because of food supply chain concerns that we've experienced because of the pandemic, since the pandemic, require state agencies to purchase more of the food that's grown, produced, processed in state. And there's a percentage in this executive order for all agencies to meet. So in 2023, it was 5% because it just passed, but eventually it will grow to 30% in 2027. And I think that's an opportunity for all state agencies. And there's a task force that's been created. Department of Corrections is on the task force. It's an opportunity for all state agencies to rethink about building those partnerships with community farmers or groups that are working to get better food. And then I think that, you know, as you mentioned, the Food Production Center is this huge facility with millions of dollars that have been invested, and it's not realistic to say, well, let's get rid of that, right? So there's opportunities to be creative, and we're seeing this across other states and other jurisdictions. I mentioned Maine earlier. They're definitely really rethinking or being very creative about the way that they're accessing food and the relationship between food and incarcerated people. In Washington State, they also have similar setup like in New York, where they have a cook chill facility, right? The Food Production Center is a cook chill facility. So food is cooked in these like large pots, like a big crock pot kind of. And all of the ingredients are thrown in there. The food is boiled and cooked and then poured into large plastic bags that are then chilled and packaged and shipped. In Washington State, they also have that, but they started out, their governor passed an executive order in 2013, which required state agencies to think about improving nutritional needs of all the people served by the state, and that included the incarcerated people. So they started out with improving what is available in the commissary, and there was a partnership between the Department of Health and the Department of Corrections to look at the items that are being that are available to people in the commissary and think about how we can make those items more nutritional. So there's different opportunities. There's also, expanding, adding appliances to all facilities so that everybody's able to cook their own food, right? So refrigerators and cooktops, expanding the horticultural program. In New York, they have a horticulture program. Harvest Now donates seeds in exchange for the food that is grown in the prisons to be donated. So 100% of what's grown in the prison is donated. So incarcerated people are learning how to grow food, but they don't have access to it.
Yeah. They're donating it out of the prison.
Out of the prison, back into the community, right? Like that's the way that community engagement is happening. In Maine, they have a horticulture program where 80% of what's grown gets kept and used in the prisons and 20% is donated into the communities. So looking at other jurisdictions that are already starting to make these changes and figuring out how New York can be creative and implement some of those.
Last but not least,
I mean, I think, it's December in New York City, New York State, which means it's budget season, which is, the policy of every year, we're going to continue to push for better funding for the programs that we work with. So that's CFC at the city level, and at the state level, that's HIPNAP and Nourish New York. And specifically to the point about like Nourish New York and something that Nina mentioned about sort of connecting farmers to, in your case, schools and lunch ladies, but in our case to food pantries. We would really love to see more fresh product included at all levels, it be city, state, or federal level, because for us, I mean, it's healthier, first off, but it's also inherently kosher and halal. I mean, the less you, in general, the less you process food, the more it's going to be acceptable to more people. And so really trying to like see how we can work and improve and get fresh product. I think it is something that would create a big change for a lot of folks. I mean, people just would rather have a carrot than a canned carrot at the end of the day. And then I think also it was mentioned earlier today, but the Farm Bill, it was supposed to be happening now. We're expecting it to happen in the next year, but for emergency food, that's sort of going to possibly have a huge impact on how we work, both on, like funding levels, but I think a lot of what my work is and the changes that we're trying to make in the Farm Bill are about how specifically USDA and the states that administer USDA programs just do their practices, how they do procurement, how they change their procedures in a way that could better serve the communities that we work with, I think. I mean, it's a little past due, but there was also a rule change recently around TFAP and SNAP that I think we'll see how that nets out, but it could have some really big impacts on how people just interact with the emergency food system. And the goal of the rule change was to make access easier. And so we're really hopeful that that could be a shift and a change that could help people interact with emergency food systems with a lot less barriers for them to get in there. And then I think like long-term, I don't know if it's policy per se, but it's really just about sort of understanding, who often we like view all of our data and all of our statistics are really like based off how much food we can hold in our warehouse and how we can put it out into the world. And I think we make more policy changes by understanding what the demand side is, who clients are, what they need and what they're eating and how they're utilizing the food. And if we can allow that to drive policy sort of from the bottom up, very generally, I think that would be really important.
I love that point about the less you process food, the more people can do with it. So it's a really good point because we know, all the detriments of processed food overall. So just another good note for that argument. We have a ton of great questions, so I'm going to throw them out to whomever wants to answer them, and maybe we'll just do one person can answer it. If you have something to add, quickly hop on, but there are a lot of really great questions. So we know that emergency, carceral, and school food programs struggle to attract and retain employees with culinary backgrounds because of budget constraints. How have you seen systems attract talent that can make high quality, culturally relevant food well, or have you?
I think staffing shortages is a big concern across the state in a lot of different areas. I don't really know how to answer that.
Yeah. What my brain thinks is like, it's still the same policy that says that they want to only spend $2 a meal as the same policy that says that they're only going to pay the lunch worker $15 an hour, so I think they go hand in hand, right? If we're rethinking what the offerings are, we need to rethink who is a part of offering them to our students and what background they need to have. And like the money just got to keep moving up, you know.
I mean, it's a question that's been asked, I think, you know, Luis got asked it, like, we have at New York Health Foundation, we have a primary care area, and workforce development is just is a whole area of funding. And there's a reason that you see it across the social sectors, and it's income inequality, right? Until we pay people good wages, it's hard to keep people in jobs. And so, I mean, pay people more, people can buy more food, right?
Yeah.
Here's another question. Long Island is quickly approaching a majority minority demographic. Suburbs are becoming the first hometown for newly arrived immigrants from Central and South America who have major challenges with food insecurity and housing. As policymakers, how do we include the needs of these suburban immigrants into the wider statewide food policy conversations? And I will be the first to say that Long Island so often gets left out of these conversations, and the Universal School Meals campaign did a great job to engage them, but they are a place where we'd like to do more funding too, frankly.
I mean, I think part of it, and it is just trying to gain a better understanding. You know, like New York City is very lucky to have the emergency food programs that it has. It's a very unique city in that way, and with that comes a lot of you know, professionalism and research, and you know, I'm part of like these policy working groups and coalitions, but increasingly we've personally taken on the trying to understand what is sort of happening in the rest of the state and trying to put a focus on specifically cultural needs in the rest of the state. I know just from work that we've done recently in research around upstate New York, like we've learned a lot about sort of like recent like Afghani communities that have come in the last few years as sort of the US left that conflict. And a lot of like Yemeni immigrants that end up in places like Buffalo and Rochester, who need support, but are also going to these areas that are maybe not thought of as like havens for immigrants in certain ways. And so I think it's really also just doing a better job communicating and engaging across the state. And then I also know that, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the work about sort of how new people who are newer to this country, especially with all the conflicts that we have going on in this world right now, how they can access different benefits and social service programs. And I know New York State is somewhat of a leader in that way, but we can always do better with allowing folks to access the programs that we have that can support people as they're sort of trying to immigrate to this country and get situated.
And I think it goes back to that like process point again and asking the question you told me when you started surveying, because you're expanding work beyond New York City to the state, when you started surveying people in areas outside the city said, oh, we don't have a need for kosher or halal food. And you said, no, you probably just don't know about it because they've stopped coming and asking for those foods, right? And so, you know, it's hard to prove a negative.
Yeah, I mean, people aren't going to go utilize a food bank system if they don't believe it's going to serve them. And you know, like we very specifically, we had a conversation with a different food bank upstate, and they were sort of like, we don't see the need. You know, like it's a very, maybe if it exists, a small community, but like that's not an issue here. Yet we got like 3 or 4 survey responses from their same local community. And so it really is like, in the same way that I mentioned at the start of this, like when my family sort of immigrated to this country, they stayed in their small family unit sort of together, and like food was very important to how they understood culture and community. When other folks are joining our country, they're also sort of staying in small trusted circles, and they're not availing themselves of services because the services aren't designed to serve them, you know? And so until we can really gain a better understanding of what's going on upstate, but also get the large emergency food providers upstate to take these issues more seriously, they're just not going to know about the issue because people aren't going to come and use their services or trust them to meet their needs.
So what are the tensions around ensuring culturally relevant food and balancing nutrition, or are there any tensions? And how can good food sourcing support cultural responsiveness in nutrition programs?
I think we definitely talked about a lot of tensions, right? I just kind of keep saying money. In Buffalo, our immigrant community, I think, doesn't face some of the same or as great of financial challenges as folks who come to this side of New York. And so what we see a lot of our folks doing, new Americans, folks coming to that area, there able to like access land for growing and building their own community around agriculture in a different way than I think maybe folks have the ability to do so here. I think that pain point of like not knowing about the services, not knowing how to utilize them, and not seeing yourself and your community reflected in them isn't as great in a smaller region like Buffalo, where folks can maybe mobilize in a different way that can develop solutions. So now we have a community in Buffalo, Providence Farm Collective, and they're like moving folks from like the west side inner city to like a farmland maybe 20 miles south, and they're growing and they're moving that food back up into the community, right? And then the new folks that come into that area then are exposed to this process, this system that they've created for themselves, right? And it's not perfect. They're still looking for funding and resources, but they're more inclined, I see folks are more inclined to do for selves. And even if you're not necessarily an immigrant, but we have folks on my team in the Food Equity Network that are just like, put up a fence, grow your garden, and to hell with whatever the city says about what that land is supposed to be for. If they're not doing anything with it right now, what they can't say is that feeding people isn't a necessity, right? So some folks are kind of just taking the pain points into their own hands. And maybe that's the start of a lot of pilots. And I don't know how that leads up to full scale policy. But I certainly think that there are a lot of people who are just tired of waiting and are ready to do for themselves, whatever that means. It looks different for different people.
I mean, one thing that I thought when we visited the correctional facility also is that there's a tension between trying to figure out foods people will eat and foods they're just used to seeing on the plate for them, right? Like, this sort of like general idea of like what's acceptable for institutional food. And so I think like overcoming that and continues to be a challenge.
But it really, I think, sorry.
Yeah, no, of course.
I think what isn't also said, right? It's money and there's definitely like structural systemic issues, racism really being at the heart of it that, I was just at dinner last night and a friend of mine is a nurse in this area, and she's happened to tell me that, when she's working at one hospital in Long Island, like the food and they're eating shrimp scampi and things like that. And wherever she's at in South Bronx is, she brought some guy food for his lunch because she felt, or for his birthday, because she couldn't fathom him having to eat whatever they were going to serve on that day as, as a celebration of, his life and the fact that he had to spend that day in the hospital. But I think like what's the difference, when we're talking geographically, there's not a lot of space between wherever she was working previously and where she's working now. I think it's about like the mindset that gets put into these structures of where certain things are okay and where certain things are not okay. And that's just a universal pain point that if not addressed, we're never going to move past it.
So that's hospitals. That leads perfectly into the next question, if that's okay. So wondering how carceral systems can center and honor cultural food preferences from a human dignity intent without recognizing and addressing the fact that there are systemic and intentional policies that do not value BIPOC communities and that contribute to large populations from these communities making it into the carceral population. Re-summarizing that, can you talk a little bit about the intersection of carceral institutions, racism, and food? Which is just an easy topic.
How much time do you have?
5 minutes, actually.
Well, I think Mina said it, right? Institutional racism is real and it still exists, and it impacts every aspect of incarceration, including food. The fact that people think it's okay to serve moldy food on people's food trays and are not disgusted by it themselves, is baffling. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think it's as I said earlier, the food is seen as a you must meet a minimum guideline to feed incarcerated people. It's not seen as an opportunity to provide nourishment, to teach nutritional value, and not seen as a way to that will also help people's mood, right? Like when you're hungry, it really impacts your mood. And that then impacts everything else that happens, right? Like people are on a line in mess hall waiting to get food that they're not really looking forward to eat, but they don't have any money to purchase it anywhere. And so, you know, you bump somebody by mistake and a fight happens. I mean, I have a younger son who, like everyone in our family, is very, you know, want to make sure that he is never hungry.
Never hangry.
Because hangry is real. And once you get food into him, he turns into a completely different person. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a different way of thinking. You have to be open to thinking about it more than just, yeah, we're providing bread, margarine, chilled applesauce, beans that are coming from these frozen bags, and
Good.
that's okay.
On the subject, last question, answer all of you or one of you, however you feel. A different way of thinking, like what could culturally relevant institutional food look like in the places where you work?
I mean, I don't know how to think about that on a large scale, right? I'm a
You could-
systems thinker. I'm not I don't actually do some of the food prep, but this year, fortunately, in Buffalo, we just did a farm to school workshop, right? We went to, I think, what we thought was one of the most equipped high school kitchens in the district. And we got some parents, youth, community members involved, farmers, and try to create a farm to table meal in the settings that the school has, in the time limit that a lunch aide would have to prepare a meal, and see if, you know, you could prepare a veggie, a starch, a protein, with, you know, just some creativity, some zhuzh, you know, make it look appetizing when it hits the plate. And could that be done in the facilities that some of our schools have? And I mean, it was a one-time workshop just to pilot it, but we were able to, you know, make some progress. We were able to pull together local produce, get it arrived to the school, prepare it in that kitchen, talk with some of the lunch aides that were still there, because we offer breakfast in Buffalo. So our kids are eating, I think, 6 days a week at the public school if they so choose to. And so we were there on a Saturday morning, and it was really awesome to see on a small scale that, like, it's possible, right? You know, it's possible that the urban farmer can have Friday meal day at the school, right? And perhaps maybe it's one day and it's the school in their district, but the kids in that neighborhood can drive by the farm on the way home to school, and then they can also eat from that farm at lunchtime, you know? And I think it just has to start on the pilot level. I think you all were really on target with the name, because you have to just try it out and then keep scaling. Like I took over.
No, I think for prisons, it means expanding the horticultural programs where people have an opportunity to grow their own food and actually keep some of it and use it. Increasing the number of appliances across the facilities so that people can cook their own foods and store their foods in refrigerators so food doesn't spoil. I think it means providing more nutritional options in the commissary. If people are choosing to eat commissary items, then you know, ramen noodle is good once in a while, but every day for 10 plus years, it's not healthy.
I mean, I think in my world and in the emergency food world, I think it's about the sort of the theme that we've been talking about is it's like who deserves what, you know, and culturally responsive food and emergency food is about valuing the clients that we interact with, their experiences, and ensuring that they can not only eat but eat well. I think we talk a lot about, I mean, it's the New York Health Foundation. We're here to talk about health, but I think mental health is also a really important part of how people interact with their food products. I think in the future, I'm very hopeful that different inputs and different systems will be more responsive to the needs of their communities. I think for far too often, we've sort of had this very generalized model of how can we just get the most food to the most people. And I don't think that that works long-term. And so I'm just hopeful that the future of culturally responsive food is a future with sort of dignity for the folks that we serve, with respecting different people's values and different people's inputs into the systems, and with trying to change how we design programs and practices and how we bid out contracts to value those things rather than just the cheapest contract we can bid.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. Next up, you're going to hear from a panel of leaders from across the state working to strengthen local food systems. That's going to be moderated by Ann Palmer from, excuse me, from Center for a Livable Future at Johns Hopkins University. And please join me in a round of applause for Nina and Ashley. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you. I tried to find you earlier, but I don't. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is a pleasure to be with you all this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. And my name is Ann Palmer, as I was already introduced. I am from the Center for a Livable Future. We are an academic center at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And I was asked to facilitate this panel with these three wonderful people because of some work we've been doing with them, and also because of a project that I've been involved with for the last 10 years. So our center has hosted a project called Food Policy Networks. And part of that project is building the capacity of food policy councils and similar groups to do advocacy and policy work. And we do that through communities of practice. We do curbside consulting, these one-on-one consultations. We develop resources. We have a listserv, and we also do a survey of food policy councils around the country about every 18 months. So we try to pay attention to what's going on around the country with these issues. And one of the things we've been involved with most recently with some support from the NYHealth Foundation is working with a number of their grantees who are working on food policy issues. And these three represent the organizations that are part of that group. And we've done that through some workshops and one-on-one, and then also connecting them with peer groups, peer food policy councils around the country that have done similar work and have some experience to share. So it's been a real pleasure to work with them. And I'm going to introduce them, and then I was asked to spend just a few minutes talking about what we mean by the local food system, why food policy planning is important, and what are food policy councils doing that is relevant to the discussion we're having today. So I'm going to start on the far end over there. And so we have Ashima Paris-Odrago, who's the policy manager at Equity Advocates. She's originally from Jamaica, and she joined the food justice movement over a decade ago, finding community in farming. She's taught food justice, advocated for universal school lunches, and implemented and led youth programs. As the policy manager, Ashima implements policy goals, engages in government relations, and hosts advocacy workshops. She spent 6 years with the East New York Farms as a project director and led the Youth Justice Network, organizing youth-led events. In 2019, she co-founded the Youth Empowerment Pipeline at Green Guerrillas. She was recognized in 2022 by the North American Association for Environmental Education as one of their 30 under 30. And with a background in political science and sociology and ongoing public administration studies, she aims to highlight the importance of food in everyday life through her work. Next, we have Mike Bolger. Mike is the Healthy Communities Coordinator for the Healthy Kids Coalition at Common Ground Health, and he serves on the Rochester Food Policy Council. Mike holds a master's degree in food studies from New York University and previously coordinated food access programs and culinary nutrition programs at New York Presbyterian Hudson Valley Hospital. He advocates for policies and systems that will better support health through access to good food and environments that promote physical activity. And then next to me, we have Teresa Kraus, who is the Food Council Coordinator at the Food Bank of the Southern Tier. Teresa is the Food Council Coordinator for Broome County Food Council since August of 2022. She has had many years of coordination, outreach, and networking experience in various business and ministry jobs. Teresa's been a resident of Broome County for 36 years and holds a degree in nutritional biochemistry and a focus in inorganic chemistry. So now I'm going to circle back and just briefly, literally just a few minutes, talk about what do we mean by the local food system? And, we think of local food systems as being these collaborative networks that really integrate the functions of the supply chain, but they're doing it with a goal to enhance the environmental, social, and the economic health of a particular locale. And I say that to say that economic efficiency is not the primary driver in a local food system, as it is for so much of our other food systems. Some of the hallmarks of a local food system is greater transparency, more responsive to local needs. We certainly found during the pandemic the capacity for local and regional producers to serve their communities, which was much needed. It builds on community assets. It reflects the values around racial equity, economic justice, resiliency, sustainability of any given locale. The other thing it does is this is the whole theme of this is being about pilots, is that local food systems often are piloting projects that we eventually see trickling up to the federal level, which is a really important hallmark of it. Sometimes people kind of dismiss what's happening at the local level. It's just not that important. It is truly very important because that's where so much of the innovation happens, and what we've already heard about some of those examples today. Changing the local food system requires a lot of time because it's being done through relationship building. And we have seen that food policy councils are one of those entities that brings people together to kind of collectively address these issues that cannot be addressed alone. How do they do that? They do it through public education, partnerships, programs, and policy and advocacy work. Why do we even need such an entity to do this? And I think, we all know how complex food system problems are, and that it really does require a lot of expertise and experience to understand and solve them. And people experiencing those problems need to be involved with and leading efforts to solve them. So we think that really the goal is to build a lot more political will that reflects the community's interests and needs and not the corporate interests. The work requires a lot of trade-offs. Oftentimes we find ourselves seeking balance between what sort of incremental reforms and some immediate needs, while we are still in pursuit of systemic changes that we all know need to happen. And then I'll just leave with one of the things to keep in mind, and that all these folks are very aware of, is that none of these things happen at just one scale. That people working at the local scale have to understand what's happening at the county scale, at the state level, at the regional level, and the national level. And they, what we have seen is just an incredible understanding of how important it is for them to be doing advocacy work at all those different scales, and really recognizing that it's going to be at the ground level where they're going to feel it the most, but that doesn't mean that they're not advocating for the federal legislation like the Farm Bill. So I'm going to stop there. That's all you need to hear from me. And we're going to start off with our first question. And what I'd like to do is have each of you all talk a little bit about your region and then share a story of how your group was started. And Teresa, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks, Ann. Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm Teresa Kraus from the Broome County Food Council. Broome County is our region. Where is Broome County? We are in the Southern Tier. We're upstate for all you New Yorkers living here in the city. And we have, it is a beautiful area. We're very close to the Finger Lakes. We're very close to the Catskill Mountains. We're kind of centered there. We're directly about an hour south of Syracuse, and the rolling hills are gorgeous there. We have about 197,000 residents in Broome County. We're looking at 1 of 8 people experience food insecurity. That's adults, and 7 children in Broome County experiencing food insecurity. The Food Policy Council, and we're moving towards policy because we're fairly new. It actually started in 2013 as an anti-hunger task force for children with that demographic focus. As they continued through the years, they saw that food insecurity is across the whole community of Broome County. And so in 2019, they decided to start the Broome County Food Council, and then COVID. And so the Food Council took a pause and then tried to restart again in 2021 and had to take another pause because they saw that they needed a backbone support for the work that they wanted to do. It was the council's decision that the food bank of the Southern Tier would house the backbone support. And so they were the recipients of the New York Health Foundation grant. And then I started in August of 2022. And so the Food Council now has achieved a lot in the last, how many months now? Almost 16 months. And we have 4 work groups, 3 work groups that are dedicated to looking at sustaining food for our community members, and healthy food options is a huge focus for Broome. And so our 3 work groups are doing that, and our underserved population, families with young children, and advocacy work groups. Thanks, Teresa. Mike.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am here from Rochester, New York, which is in between Buffalo and Syracuse. It's another sort of small, big city. It's on Lake Ontario, also beautiful hills, access to the Finger Lakes. I feel like I'm making a pitch for you all to come visit me. Unfortunately, a lot of people have left Rochester, especially the city proper. It was once the home of, and still is the home of, Kodak and Xerox and some other big corporations. And a lot of those manufacturing jobs went away in the past decades. And so, like many Rust Belt cities, there's a lot of vacant lots. And in Rochester, we have, it's like the 2nd highest childhood poverty rate in the country. For cities our size. And there's bordering suburbs that are much more affluent. So for us in Rochester, one of the things that we face every day is this disparity in inequity. And that shows up in our food system. I work for an organization that tries to address regional health disparities. And because food is such an important social determinant of health, we were able to join in partnership with our regional food bank, FoodLink, and our city government in a previous administration to start exploring the idea of starting a food policy council to look at some of the systems and policy changes that we could use to address food as a social determinant of health. We had a film screening that was open to the public, and we wanted to create a discussion and just sort of take the temperature, see would people come along with us on this journey, because we knew we wanted to make it very community driven and resident led. Unfortunately, in Rochester, we get a lot of snow. You might have heard of that. And so the night of the film screening, there was this blizzard basically, and it was impossible to get anywhere. And I was standing with the people from our food bank and the people from the mayor's office in the theater, hoping that we would maybe get a dozen people out at this film screening. Well, it was standing room only. And that was like our first indication that tons of people wanted to come with us on this journey to create a food policy council. was maybe 3 years ago now. We've since formed a food policy council that is 10 resident members. So they're not there representing their employer or any major stakeholder. They're just there as community members. And then 3 what we call administrative members, and that's a representative from my organization, a representative from the food bank, and a representative from city government.
Thanks, Mike. Ishima.
Hi, everyone. I'm from New York City. So y'all saw what you see, what you get. There's not much to explain in context. My work revolves around the New York City Food Policy Alliance. So our group was founded in the wake of COVID. Leah and Gabby, who are the co-founders of the organization, they had a lot of stakeholder conversations with folks in the food movement to talk about like what's going on. And what they've been hearing is that people were scared, fearful, concerned about what will happen in the wake of COVID, and especially with the food movement. So from that point forward, and from hearing all these shared experiences and fear and concern, they decided to create and have a space for people to voice their experience, what they're going through, and how to solve those issues. So initially, our alliance was a policy committee, an outreach committee, and the outreach committee was mainly focused on building the alliance and getting more stakeholder voices in the room. Policy committee was focused on policy issue areas and how to drive those change in New York City and also statewide. Now COVID is ended, or it's still around, but it's not as intense as it was in the past 2 to 3 years. We were left with, where do we stand? What are we doing and how can we move forward? So the group decided to pivot into a food policy council model where we're now focused on issue-based areas. So we have 3 committees that are food access and benefit, youth development and urban agriculture, and also economic investment. And all those groups are working together succinctly so that we are advancing policy changes within the food system and not working in silos, because we've seen how silos have divided our work and to make it more hectic. So we're able to come together within our group conversations to talk about policy issue areas that we should be targeting, and also assess how does that impact our work so that one area of food is not getting more benefit than the other, but how we're able to interconnect our work and to make sure that it's beneficial for everyone around. So equity is at the stake within the work that we do.
So the next question, Mike, is for you. Rochester has had a strong relationship with your city government. What would people inside of city government say about the role of the council and the relationship with city staff, and how it's been evolving and changing over time?
Yeah, and it has evolved and changed. So it started in a previous administration. There was an employee, a policy person in the mayor's office who was one of the founding people in our group who helped come up with this project. And it was formalized through city council legislation. So the city committed to providing a staff member to assist with the council and to also listen to the council when we have recommendations for them, right? We're not a policy setting group, but we have that sort of in with city council. And then elections happened. We got a new mayor, a new administration, and many new council members and new council leadership. And we were deep in our own sort of internal work of creating this council and starting this council. So we were doing a lot of stuff that wasn't public facing. That was figuring out our bylaws, figuring out our conflict resolution policy, setting our action agenda so that we knew which priority areas we wanted to work on. So we had gone kind of quiet for a little while, and it was on us to reestablish relationships and grow relationships. And one of the things that was really helpful was we did have that staff member from the planning department at the time on our food policy council. So they were able to liaise with other city staff. And we've now begun to work on projects with different city departments. And I think through building those relationships and proving that we have some value and that we can make their jobs easier and help with their work, we've become increasingly look to as, some wise counsel, in the words of our mayor. And so that's a really exciting opportunity and where we've been working towards. It's a great thing when we're able to bring community expertise, lived expertise, and learned expertise to city policy making and augment, amplify, and help out their staff.
Yeah, that's actually the best case scenario, right? Yeah. Ashima, you are working in a city that's the size bigger than most states, let's say. So how do you organize this? And can you share some of your experiences around, what kind of structures have helped you figure out how to reflect all the different communities that you are engaged with? And can you talk a little bit about how those structures came about?
Yeah, I would say internally being a staff with diverse background helped a lot. So Leah, who's one of the co-founders, works in food access and benefit organizations. Gabby also did a lot of political work, and my background with youth development and urban ag, being able to tap on our lived experience, our network, and reaching out to them and be like, hey, we're starting this thing. This is our vision. Can you be a part of it? And can you bring your experience with you as well? And we're able to develop our policy platform similar to Mike, to identify what are our issue areas, what are our needs, and how can we advance them. And then that led to us developing our committees based on our issue areas and priorities. And as a group collectively coming together to figure out how we're going to mobilize our efforts and also to identify like who is missing from the conversation. We can't have everyone and everything. So we also have to be strategic in our approach. So we are also tapping into other coalition groups to learn from them, to hear what's going on, and to also support their efforts. And as much as we try to reflect the New York City food system, just like our subway system is a mess and we cannot. So we have to stay true to what our stakeholders want us to focus on and to make sure that they're also having a buy-in to those efforts as well. Because if we're inviting people to only focus on what we care about, then no one is going to feel tapped into or feel committed to the work. So leaving room and creating space for that commitment is important in our approach. And we've been able to master that this year.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Teresa, this next question is for you. You all implemented a community survey to help you decide what to work on. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned and how are you going to use those results?
Yeah, so we decided, our Families with Young Children Underserved Population Work Group decided that they wanted to do a community survey. We had about 18, 19 questions, but one of our biggest focus was to look at food access and what are the barriers that surround food access in Broome County. And so we distributed, 1,000 surveys paper to people's hands. We found that qualitative data is going to be priceless. As council members, they had conversations with people all over the county in different areas, both urban and rural. And we had about 1,300 that responded online. And so our initial results are showing that the biggest food access barriers are, no shock to you, transportation, income, and site hours and location. But let's take that a step further, okay? Because we kind of saw that coming. And so early on, the council developed an emergency food access map. And this map, I brought a visual. This is our rack card. This map has all food access to the entire county: food pantries, community meals, senior centers, mobile food pantries, grocery stores, school centers, and shelters. And this was developed by Binghamton University through their geography department, and it's a GIS map. This is key. We saw this coming. So our initial analysis, the Binghamton University students who are doing our analysis was doing geospatial mapping, looking at food access and those barriers. And so what they're doing now is they're taking the maps, the 2 maps, and they're overlaying them to tell a story. So that's what we initially saw. And with transportation being one of the highest barriers, what we're looking at is how we're going to move food to the people and people to the food. So yes, is the answer to that question, but we have to have more discussion surrounding that. So what's happening in the county is some very exciting things. There is a project going on with one of our nonprofit, our only nonprofit grocery store in Broome County. And they have a bus, and they are going to be moving food, the grocery store, throughout Broome County. This is a wonderful project, and we can see this as an initiative going forward. Another group organization is moving food to the people by, and I think one of the other panelists that was just up here was talking about restaurants, right? And cooking for and delivering hot meals. That's what this organization is doing. And they are in a kitchen that was donated, and they are cooking up meals and distributing to people who have been displaced in our local hotels who are homeless. And so they are delivering hot meals. And so this is going on at the same time we're getting these initial results from the survey. So it's really exciting to see this is already happening. Now, people to the food is totally different. This is going to take a lot of conversation on how we're going to improve transportation in Broome County. But at the same time, and let me just say, this was going on. The council did not have discussions, but it was through relationships and it was through conversations did we find out that Broome County was doing a transportation survey at the same time we were doing our community survey. And so we are sharing results of that survey, both surveys, so that we can discuss how we can improve transportation throughout Broome. So we're very excited about that. And then income. We've heard a lot about that, and that is where we're focusing our advocacy and public policy work group is going to be looking at advocacy on both the state and federal level as it influences the county level.
Thanks, Teresa. Yep. So one of the questions we get frequently is like, how you've got these multiple issues that you're trying to address, right? And it really is across the gamut. And I'd love to hear, Mike, we'll start with you, just an example of how do you determine where you put your priorities? And it is this like, okay, we really need to address the hunger issues. And a lot of food policy councils during the pandemic were completely focused on emergency food because they needed to be. And at the same time, they didn't want to lose that focus on these structural issues are what's causing these daily issues. So if you could, Mike, we'll start with you to talk about that.
Yeah. So I guess it's easy when you talk about a food system to get lost, right? There's so many different opportunities to change. There's so many different moving parts. And if you try to do everything, you're going to overextend yourself. So what we did with our food policy council is we kind of made a mess. We had everybody just like brain dump, just a complete brainstorm, every idea of every challenge, every asset, every opportunity or thing they want to see happen. And we took all of those virtual Post-it notes and we started to group them. What are the themes? These sort of revolve around school food. These sort of revolve around urban agriculture. And then we had the groups. And all these ideas of what we could work on underneath those groups. And then we just worked to build consensus with our food policy council. And it was informed by things that we had heard from the community in our planning process. The city did a comprehensive plan pretty recently that dealt with food. A lot of food issues came up from their public input sessions. And so we eventually settled on 3 priority areas, urban agriculture, community gardens, youth and food, and municipal plans and policies. And those are pretty broad things, but we have immediate actions and things we can work on under each one. And it sort of gives us that framework of saying, you know, if a new opportunity comes up or we finish some work in one space, like, let's stay focused and stay within the priority. Like, how does this new opportunity fit there? So, you know, we had to like zoom out to zoom in. And now we feel like we have pretty good, you know, guides for where we're going to progress forward.
And will that be a process you probably use going forward also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we wanted to like make sure, so it was really important. We're dealing with 13 individuals, right? And we're trying to represent our full community, really reflect what our community wants. So we left it, you know, sort of like, this is what we're working on now, but this is all subject to change, right? We all saw what happens when COVID happens, right? Or some sort of outside force happens, things shift. So we're going to be flexible, and we feel like we built a structure that has a lot of room to move around within it. But if it needs to be scrapped and we need to start over, that's what we'll have to do.
Thanks.
Yeah, so our food policy council is still in development. We're a baby. And we have 5, within our gigantic committees, we have 5 co-chairs, and they help to facilitate and guide us into what our priorities are. So we understand that everything is important, but we also need to be strategic in the way in which we make our selection. So some things on our policy platforms, we know that will take time, and we are looking for immediate action that could happen between like a year or 2 or so. So we also assess like what's in the news right now, what are hot topics, and how can we strike while it's hot and keep it going so we don't lose momentum of it. And we also analyze like what's going to create the most impact for our constituents and our communities, and how can we leverage those opportunities to tangible actions within our alliance group. So within our subcommittees, we have our co-chairs identify 1 to 2 policy areas that we could mobilize around and get our alliance members consensus, and then we'll bring it back to the group, like, hey, these are what we're identifying right now. These are the issue areas. These are supporting documents, and these are other programs that we could assess in alignment, and also explain why the other areas might not be an area that we want to take action right now because they happen over time, and then mobilize around that. So set in roadmaps, like who we're going to be meeting with, what information we don't know, what we want to know, and how do we want to move forward? Do we want to create a new program? Do we want to enhance a program that's already in existence, and what's the feasibility around that? And we get group consensus and tangible opportunities so that each alliance member is involved in the process in some way, whether it's showing up at meetings, helping to write a letter, sign on to a letter, testifying, whatever it is, making sure there's opportunities for everyone across the board, because capacity is a concern and we have to take in account of people's time. Yeah, so that's our approach. Similar to Mike, is like making sure that people have a say-so.
That's a great point. And I think you all bring up this point about how much time it takes to do policy work and advocacy work. And Luis brought that up as well in his intro and his keynote. And I think, you know, one of the things we found, it takes groups anywhere from 3 to 5 years to even start working on policy, because there's so much that needs to happen, right? That whole, the building of relationships, the understanding each other's sectors, all of that is really important groundwork to actually get to the stage where you can do that. So can each of you tell us about one achievement that you are really proud of, that you haven't already discussed in the work that you've done thus far, recognizing that you're all in fairly early stages? Teresa, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. So I've already talked about the EFAM, the Emergency Food Access Map, and the survey. Those two really come to the top, but the other is something that the whole council is extremely proud of, and that is having a voice of action in advocacy. And one of our strongest voices on our council are people with lived experience. These are community advocates that are in work groups and are working advocacy in Broome County, but also on the state and federal level. And so besides, I should say, probably the biggest campaign right now, and we've discussed it, is healthy school meals for all New York students. The advocacy work group has been working on the Farm Bill. We've gone to Washington, D.C. and have had community advocates there speaking to our representatives. We were in Lobby Day back in January as well for healthy school meals for all kids, but also we're looking at SNAP benefits. That is really important for the Farm Bill, but also locally in Broome County, not all of our farmers markets accept SNAP benefits. And so the advocacy work group has really centered a focus on getting SNAP benefits at all of our farmers markets in Broome County. But I want to come back to healthy school meals for all New York students. Last year, we were looking for New York State to be one of those states, to be the leader in having universal meals for all. That didn't happen. There was a huge step forward, don't get me wrong, but not all students have free breakfast, free lunch in this state. And so what are we looking at? We're looking at an income issue. And, Mike brought up what is happening up in Rochester, the big industry of Kodak. Well, in Broome County, the big industry was IBM. Endicott, New York is the home of IBM. And when IBM left, all the supporting industries left as well. And so Broome County has been revitalizing, they're reimagining, they're building up, but we are still feeling the effects of that income. And probably one of the easiest things we could do is help a family of 4 who is making $51,000 a year, who can't get free lunches for their kids for $140 to come back into their family. That would be huge. That is an easy thing to do. And, kids are hungry. Why are we waiting? And so we are looking to put all advocacy work right now into making sure that New York is one of the 10 states right now that has healthy school meals for all New York students. And our community advocates will be going to Lobby Day in January next month. Oh my, next month. And we will be there to advocate for Broome County and for the rest of the state.
I want to circle back. So I'm gonna try to answer your question, but I also want to respond to the idea that policy change takes time, because for all of us, we're trying to center community voice and make sure that the people who are affected by the policies are informing the policies. But when policy takes time and someone has an immediate need, it can create some real tension. So we're working, I think in Rochester, we did a really good job of getting a group of people that's a great diverse mix of people who are, policy, wonk people, right? Who think about food systems and stuff like that. And we also made sure that our policy council has folks who came into it without a lot of food systems knowledge. They just really cared about it, right? And they wanted to put in the work. But then we sat around and we had to do all this internal work to build the Food Policy Council and strategize what we're working on. And the whole time there's that natural tension of these people joined this effort to make change, and the change isn't easily accessible. So we had to balance that, and we found opportunities to advocate for things along the way. But I think that's a really important consideration. We want to have community voice involved in our work, but you have to also be ready to confront that tension and to help everybody sort of work through it, because it does take time to make real policy change. So, all right, sorry.
That's a great answer.
Something that was successful though is like we've gotten through that, and We've had people who are really impatient that are now plugged into really cool policy making tables. So we're working with our Department of Recreation to shape what kids are served in our centers. Those are our recreation centers. And we have a lot of our Food Policy Council members are now part of the Community Advisory Council, our Community Advisory Committee for our city's new community food systems plan that they've just started the process of making. So we've finally gotten to the point, I think maybe if I had to think of one big success, we've made it through the planning stages, and we're plugging people into opportunities for them to, influence and shape the policies that are affecting their neighborhoods.
Yeah. I would say we have a lot of successes, but one of them that jumped out to me at first is the way in which we mobilize our alliance. And also how much our alliance group have supported us. So we do a lot of community engagement work, policy, advocacy, civic engagement, workshops, and training. And we have our alliance members support us with most of our training and even join us and help to enrich the conversation and push it further. So that's been something that's really been successful, and also being able to open up those opportunities to a lot of community members that are not involved in policy, and that is not a policy wonk, because that is really important, right? In the summer, I was doing a lot of grassroots work around the Farm Bill campaign, and I would show up in this place and be like, hey, do you know what the Farm Bill is? And they're like, no. I'm like, what? Like, this is the one bill that dictates everything that we eat, everything in our food system, and not everyone is aware of that, right? So being able to show up, provide the information, and also lead people into discussion and face the fact and the reality of like, this is happening, it happens every 5 years. And we vote for our president every 4 years, and this bill that dictates and nourish our body every 5 years is crazy, and it's important for us to be active and involved. And our approach is to, as we're doing a lot of grassroots is also important. We can't forget the people that we're fighting with, because we need to educate them and inform them of issues that are taking place, and also providing opportunities for them to step in and also support and be a part of the table. So something that we're really proud of at Equity Advocates is being able to merge the two with our work. Yes, it is a lot of work, and it's like, how can you do this with 2 staff? But our alliance comes in, we tap into their resources. They also help support us and jump in wherever we need support as well. So our mobilization in that effort is something that we're really proud of.
Yeah, you bring up a good point of how hard it is to attract people to the word policy.
Yeah.
I think, we all don't go out like born to do policy. And, I certainly was not into policy work until I started doing this position. And it was just like policy, well, don't need to do that. Like, give me a program. But, so I think that is not people's natural inclination, right? Is to say, I want to do that. But once I think people start to realize how much it affects what they're doing. And you can only go so far with a program until you bump up against policy barriers, right? And it becomes a challenge. So I thank you both for those questions or those responses. So these are some questions from the audience. We've got a couple right now. And Mike, this one is for you. Can you talk about challenges that you have, if any, with the government representatives on your Food Policy Council?
No problems at all.
We're in the cone of silence now, Mike. So
It's on the internet, right?
Yeah.
No, I think the biggest challenge is that, governments can be big, right? And that there are lots of people working on different things, and almost every department intersects with the food system. Probably every department intersects with the food system. So I think the biggest challenge for us is we have a great partnership with city staff that interacts with us on a regular basis. And it's now up to us to, spread that and grow more relationships, and help people understand that there is now a Food Policy Council in Rochester. And if you're working on something that touches food, you reach out to us, because we'd love to help and love to share what we know.
Okay, this next question is for anybody. So as policy change naturally takes time, have you explored public-private partnerships, foundation partnerships, or other philanthropic approaches to triage near-term need and build momentum for policy change?
So the question is basically like, are we meeting immediate needs? I think,
Yeah,
right.
or more, and even near term, I mean, midterm needs, you know.
Yeah, I think we've tried to be responsive. We've also tried to really define what our food policy council is, and we're trying to do less programmatic stuff. And so really just making those connections as opposed to stepping into the gap ourselves. There's a lot of organizations around Rochester that were already doing direct program and direct intervention work. And what we saw as missing was something to bring those together and to be able to leverage all those experience to address like the longer term policy issues and really like the forethought and the planning when it comes to how our local institutions are operating. Not sure if that answered the question. But.
Teresa or Aisha?
Yeah, I would say that our council, one of our core values is education. And so we're looking at educating our council members on the opportunities of immediate needs. So we have a couple of council members from local foundations that we help network to organizations that are looking to move food to the people. And so this is key. It's part of the partnerships, it's part of the collaboration, it's part of the education, but it's part of coordination and networking and knowing people and pointing people in the right direction. And that's been really successful, and that's growing roots, which is what we want to continue to do and repeat. So
Yeah, I would say similar to Teresa's point, our organization, we always stress that we're not a fundraising organization, because a lot of our groups that comes to us, there was like, we need more funding, we need more funding. I'm like, we do too, but we can't, like, it's hard for us to leverage or to even like take on that responsibility within itself, because policy work is not funded at all. Like, I come from an urban ag youth development work, money is being thrown at us. When it comes to policy work, is like, well, who's brave I have to dig up to like find gold, like, you know, so it's really hard to do, but we try our best to like share opportunities with our partners. And to, if partners are like, hey, can we like be a co-sponsor or something on a funding opportunity, we try to make sure that we're there for them to support them. But it's hard to be the backbone and to do a lot of that leveraging work, but we try our best.
Aisha, I'm always going to have that image in my mind, digging up a grave for gold now. So it's a good one. So the next question, the strength of your networks are the multi-sector partnerships. How do you balance the priorities of partners who might have also top priorities for their specific sector? Because I think you've answered this to some degree, but this is a little more direct maybe, and it's for anybody.
I think understanding equity is a part of it, because as much as all of our work is important, having the understanding that you're, like, the way how I look at it is like, your sector is solid, it's good, you guys have a lot of money, but what about this group that doesn't have as much? How can we leverage that relationship and share that equity across the board? And I also think like creating spaces for groups to work on their issue areas so that it doesn't create tension within the groups as well. So having these committees, breakout rooms where people are like focusing on their issue area and advancing that at their own pace is important. And like letting everybody know is like, all of our issues are important. However, we have to figure out how to strategically advance those areas while working together as a group, and creating those committees have helped us a lot.
That was a much better answer than what I was going to say. Don't let the institutions make the decisions about what you're going to work on, which is really not as thoughtful. But wherever possible, you know, like take the temperature of your community, whether it's a survey, whether it's, a charrette or an event where people have an opportunity to give feedback or any other thing, and let those responses guide you and help shape what you're working on.
I would say in Broome County, we are very, we have a wonderful advantage. And if you haven't taken advantage of your local universities, Binghamton University has a whole civic engagement department. And because of that, they are able to help the community in ways that even our community doesn't know. And so we try to continue to network and get that information out to the community and say, look, if you're looking to work on this particular issue, Binghamton University can come up alongside you, both staff, faculty, and students. Students have become so involved in our local community from Binghamton University. And look, they're doing our data analysis. In 2 days, we're going to get the final analysis, all from Binghamton University students. And so this is building a foundation, and it's just communicating it out, right? That's one of the biggest things, is trying to communicate that out as a council to the community members.
Teresa, this question is for you. Can you please explain the advantages and disadvantages of the county as a unit of organizing for a food policy council?
Oh, yes. No, there's no problems. We are very challenged in Broome County, and maybe in some of your areas you can relate to this. Broome County is very high urban, very high rural. Most of our urban areas are centered in the center of the county. Our rural areas on the outside of the county. And so this is hard to organize efforts, especially transportation in these areas. We're getting survey responses that are showing in very high urban areas problems with transportation. When we have a bus line, we have public transit. Like, why are 3 zip codes in Binghamton having issues? The reason why is because they're not all urban. And so how do we holistically look at this from the point of view of seniors, families with young children, the underserved? How do we look at that? And so we know that this is going to be probably our biggest challenge when we're talking about a food access plan for the county, but we're up for it. We know it's coming, and we are looking forward to that final analysis to help us, in looking at our strategic initiatives going forward. I hope that answered your question.
So one of these, this is a question that I think I can try answering, but I think it says me or Mike or somebody, anyone else. Are there examples from other states of local food policy actions that New York food policy councils should be considering? And of course, my cop-out answer is always, it depends. Because really, if you listen to what they're all saying, it's what's going on in the community is what's going to drive what your policy actions are going to be. There certainly are a ton of examples of policy actions that have happened around the country in all different sectors that are really interesting and can be learned from. And when we do our survey, we just closed out our survey for the food policy councils about 2 weeks ago. And what we take from there is we look at all the different sectors and we pull out examples from around the country of actions people have taken and work that they've done. And the goal of that is to basically give people an idea of the vast array of work that's happening under the council model. And so there isn't really a simple answer, but if you all have examples you want to share of other, like when you've been doing your work, what other policies have you come across and you thought, wow, that's really cool. We should try that.
That's timely.
Yeah.
There's a timely policy that Equity Advocacy is working on with its alliance members, and it's called Food for All. It's already enacted in California, and basically it's a bill that wants to create a SNAP-like program for immigrants and asylum seekers family so that they could purchase foods themselves rather than getting $3 meal, I don't know, frozen pancakes and warmed eggs at those shelters, right? So that's something that we have been exploring. We also have been exploring like raising the SNAP minimum benefit from where it's at right now federally to $100 a month for families. And the California Food for All program is so amazing and so impactful because being able to give people the funds they need to purchase the food that are one culturally relevant to them, that's local and that is also their choice rather than just giving them whatever they need is important. So that's something that we've been working on and exploring, and we've been getting like great movement so far. More information to come.
I guess the one that comes to mind is other localities that have started to regulate dollar stores and other food retail establishments. In Rochester, we have a lot of corner stores in a small amount of space and not a lot of grocery stores or quality, affordable, fresh food retail locations. And in some ways, you know, more dollar stores and more corner stores, it creates this downward pressure, right? It's like an oversaturated market. They're all trying to stock something that has the highest profit margin, and that's not, you know, fresh greens or anything like that, right? So, you know, I think the community food system plan is a great opportunity to look at some of the models from around the country that have set minimum stocking standards for food retail locations, and also look at zoning regulations to limit the number of dollar stores that can, you know, operate like right next to each other. So we'll see if we can forge that path forward in Rochester too.
I think the only thing that really came to mind was in partnering and collaborating with other food policy councils and other food councils around the United States through the technical support that we receive is these food hubs. I'm hearing more and more about food hubs and how local champions, right? The county legislators are pouring money into food hubs, and it's taken a long time to get to that point. But we are already in discussion that is how to move people to the food in that model. And so I think that I can see that going forward is going to be more discussion about that.
So 30 seconds each for each of you. Last question. What piece of advice would you give to somebody who wants to work on local food policy?
We haven't talked about it as much as I think maybe we could. We could probably do a whole nother conference on it. But what does it mean to really create space for community to take part in this change? So I would say, think about what you need to do to make your process transparent. Think about how many different ways you can create opportunities for people to plug in and engage at different levels of, you know, some people just have time to fill out a survey. Other people want to be there at the table. And if people are dedicating their time to providing that community perspective, what do you need to do to show them that they're valued and to show them that they're partners in the work and it's not extractive, right? So pay them, you know, pay them. Find out what they need to do to get to the meeting. Do they need a bus pass? Do they need a ride? Do they need childcare? And also provide food, right? Everybody loves food, so.
Oh, wow. I would say sleep a lot because you're gonna be up always like looking at things, brainstorming ideas, and at times you need to like shut your brain off because in this work, you're always finding yourself thinking about what's the next step or, oh shoot, this just came up, let me jot it down. But learning how to take rest and self-care is important because policy work is frustrating. It's like, why it gotta be so hard to feed us? Like, it impacts you as well. It is frustrating at times. I would also say going back to like stakeholder involvement is key, like knowing who needs to be a part of the conversation and why, and having like tangible and realistic goals is important when it comes to food policy work. because a lot of times it's easy for us to get sidetracked by things that might happen in the moment, but always knowing when to stay on task and stay in alignment and like bring back the conversation to the group is important, which adds on to transparency as well.
Thanks. I just want to affirm Mike in one of his comments is pay them. That is one thing that our council does for our community advocates. Okay, they are taking the time to attend meetings. They are taking the time to go to Washington, to go to Albany. Our student advocates, this is what we're doing. So please do that if you can. I would say the biggest or the advice I would give anybody who's looking to start this work is one of the best advice that I got was from a fellow food policy council coordinator in Tompkins County, one of our neighboring counties. And her name is Katie Hallis. Maybe some of you know her. She said, go out into the community and interview people. Get out there, interview people, find out what they want. And so I did that. I did that for the first 2 months of my work, and it has paid off. And so what happens is you do that, and then you network, and guess what? It just goes deeper, and you never stop. And so do that practice early, first thing, and you will not regret it.
Thank you all so very much for joining us on the panel. Luke, you could be joining me. We are going to turn it over to Mary Ford, the Director of Policy and Research for the Foundation, and she's going to give us our closing remarks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anne. That was an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you so much as well to the panelists. Again, I'm Mary Ford. I am the Foundation's Director of Policy and Research. It is amazing to have had so many of you all with us here. This morning, I think there's about 150 of you with us in person and even more folks online. The theme again today, as we all have seen many times, was pilots to policy. This theme really hinged on the idea of incremental change, of expanding momentum, of small wins leading to even bigger success. I think we really heard a lot of this in the room here today. Another common thread across these sessions, and something that we really continually see in our work at the Foundation, is the power of community voice and community-based pilots in informing broad systems change. This is really what's setting the potential for progress across the state. Today, we heard from advocates and practitioners across the state and the country about the work that they're doing to transform the food systems. First, we heard about building on the foundation set at the city level with universal school meals, with the first coalition that served as a model for the statewide coalition subsequently, and creating incredible momentum and success. I loved what Luis said about thinking big and boldly, bringing meals to so many children. Although that work is not completely done yet, we now have an opportunity to harness that model and that momentum to other federal programs. Julia then helped us dig in to bringing lessons from other institutions and other places that aren't schools, understanding that access, though very important, is not everything, and that we need to move beyond this to think about cultural relevance and dignity. We also heard about policy wins that have enabled us to shore up funding and enable food providers to more seriously consider quality in places that historically haven't been able to, like prisons. And of course, not lastly, we heard about how important investment has been in food policy to expand this work geographically across the state, combining food systems and regional models. We can elevate food as political issues and use the term trickling up. If that's not copyrighted, you might hear me use that again. I really like that. at multiple levels in this state. And it's amazing to hear where and how this work has been already started. Building the local political muscle is so important to get this change done. It starts small, and as we're seeing, it can end big. We hope that you can take some of what you've heard today back to your communities. The people here in the room today are the ones who can get this work done. In fact, I know that you already are, and I know that you're going to also get the work done to ensure that policy gets the political and public attention that it deserves. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. I know that I'm standing between you all and lunch right now. So thank you one more time to our amazing speakers, panelists, and everyone that came to our conference today. Thank you.